Anime Autopsy here, and I need you to understand something before we start this deep dive. Everyone is talking about Cross-Guild right now. Everyone is freaking out about Buggy having an Emperor-level bounty and the Marines being hunted instead of hunting. Everyone is analysing the power shifts and the New World Order and who's going to be the final villain. And they're all missing the point. Because the chaos you're seeing right now, the instability, the bounties, the collapsed alliances, the revolutionary army making moves, all of it traces back to one moment. Chapter 790, Dressrosa, when Luffy defeated Don Quixote Doflamingo. And I don't mean that in the typical shonen way where beating the bad guy has consequences. I mean it literally. When Luffy knocked out Doflamingo, he didn't just defeat a warlord. He crashed the global economy. He removed the central bank of the criminal underworld. And for the last 300 plus chapters, we've been watching the entire One Piece world experience what happens when you remove a systemic institution without a bailout plan. This is not a story about pirates and marines. This is a story about money, about supply chains and trade routes and black market economics. And if you don't understand the money, you don't understand the story. Let me paint you a picture of what Doflamingo actually was, because calling him a warlord or a villain or even a broker undersells it so dramatically that it's almost offensive. Doflamingo was a former celestial dragon who got cast out as a child, spent his teenage years learning to survive in a world that wanted him dead, murdered his own father, tried to return to Mary Jiwaise with his father's head as a ticket back in, got rejected, and then spent the next 20 plus years building a criminal empire so vast and so deeply integrated into the world's power structures that by the time we meet him in the story, he's functionally untouchable. He's a warlord, which gives him legal immunity to operate as a pirate. He's a former celestial dragon, which means he has blackmail material on the current celestial dragons, and they can't just kill him without risking exposure. He's the king of Dressrosa, which gives him a nation state to use as a base of operations. And he's Joker, the underworld broker who connects the world government to the Yonko to the revolutionary forces to everyone in between. He's not a criminal. He's a hedge fund manager. He's a private equity firm. He's too big to fail. Here's what I need you to understand about his celestial dragon blood, because this is the part everyone treats like backstory flavour when it's actually the entire foundation of his business model. Chapter 764, the Doflamingo flashback. We see him as a child getting tortured by civilians who blame all celestial dragons for their oppression. His mother dies from illness because they can't get medical care. His father is too idealistic to fight back, and young Doflamingo, at maybe 8 or 9 years old, watches all of this and learns a lesson that shapes everything he does for the rest of his life. He learns that the celestial dragons are gods only as long as they stay in Mary Jiwaise. The moment they leave the Holy Land, the moment they're exposed to the real world, they're just targets. But here's the thing. Doflamingo also learns that the celestial dragons have power that doesn't go away even when you're cast out. He learns that the world government will go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. And he learns that if you have dirt on them, if you know things you're not supposed to know, they can't just kill you. They have to negotiate. So when Doflamingo murders his father and brings the head back to Mary Jiwaise thinking it will get him readmitted, and the celestial dragons reject him, he doesn't give up. He pivots. He realises that he can't be a celestial dragon anymore, but he can use his knowledge of how they operate, his understanding of their systems, his awareness of their crimes, to build a position where they need him alive. And that's exactly what he does. He becomes Joker. He becomes the middleman. He becomes the guy who can broker deals between the world government and people the world government is publicly at war with. Because he's the only person with the connections, the immunity and the leverage to do it. His celestial dragon blood isn't a tragic backstory. It's his business license. It's his accreditation. It's the thing that makes him the only person who can sit at the table with both the Marines and the Emperors and make deals that benefit everyone while maintaining plausible deniability for the legitimate authorities. Let me give you a specific example that proves this. Chapter 725, Dressrosa. We learn that CP0 has been in contact with Doflamingo, not CP9, the secret assassination squad. CP0, the cipher pole unit that answers directly to the celestial dragons. And they're not there to arrest him. They're there to make sure he doesn't talk. They're there because Doflamingo has been selling slaves to the celestial dragons through the human auction house on Sabaody. He's been providing them with the products they use to maintain their lifestyle. And when Doflamingo gets backed into a corner during the Dressrosa arc, when Luffy and Law are about to expose everything, the world government's first instinct isn't to help Luffy, it's to help Doflamingo. They fake a news report saying he resigned from the warlords to buy him time. They send a Navy Admiral, Fujitora, but they don't give Fujitora permission to actually arrest Doflamingo until after Luffy's already beaten him. Because if Doflamingo goes down while he's still conscious, while he still has the ability to talk, he's going to expose decades of deals between the world government and the criminal underworld. He's going to burn the ledger. And that ledger implicates everyone. Now let's talk about what Doflamingo actually did on a day-to-day basis, because Underworld Broker is vague and people treat it like he's just a middle manager for crime. Chapter Swabyevan 08. During the Dressrosa arc, we get the full scope of his operations. He's running a toy factory that's actually a slave labour operation, using people transformed by Sugar's devil fruit. He's producing Smile artificial devil fruits using Sad manufactured by Caesar Clown on Punk Hazard. He's selling those Smile fruits to Kaido in exchange for weapons made in Wano using Sea Stone and a rare ore called Liquor Iron Ore. He's selling those weapons to various buyers including, and this is critical, the world government itself via CP0. He's operating the human auction house on Sabaody that supplies slaves to celestial dragons. He's laundering money through his legitimate businesses in Dressrosa. And he's doing all of this while maintaining 3 separate identities: Doflamingo the Warlord, Doflamingo the King, and Joker the Broker. He's a one-man conglomerate. He's a multinational corporation. And every single product he moves, every single deal he brokers, connects 2 parties who are supposed to be enemies. Think about the implications of this. Kaido, one of the 4 emperors, the guy the Marines are supposed to be stopping, is trading with the world government, not indirectly, not through some complex shell game, directly. Kaido gives Doflamingo weapons. Doflamingo sells those weapons to CP0. CP0 gives those weapons to the Marines. The Marines use those weapons to fight pirates. Some of those pirates work for Kaido. Kaido's Sea Stone bullets are being used to shoot Kaido's own allies. And Kaido doesn't care because he's getting paid. That's not a black market operating in the shadows of the legitimate economy. That's the legitimate economy and the black market being the same thing with different branding. And Doflamingo is the only reason it works, because he's the only person both sides trust to keep the secret. The world government trusts him because he's a former celestial dragon and they have leverage over him. Kaido trusts him because he delivers results and doesn't ask questions. And Doflamingo profits from both sides while slowly accumulating enough blackmail material on everyone to ensure they can never get rid of him. Except they did get rid of him. Chapter 7 90. Luffy punches him so hard he goes through the city and into the underground port. Doflamingo loses. The birdcage collapses. The Marines arrest him. And in that moment, the entire global economy loses its middleman. Kaido loses his Smile supply, which we see him raging about in Chapter 795. Big Mum loses access to weapons she was purchasing through Doflamingo's network, which becomes a problem during Whole Cake Island when she's trying to secure her position. The world government loses their main supplier for the human auction house and their back channel for dealing with enemies. The Revolutionary Army loses a source of intel because Doflamingo was sloppy enough that they could track his movements. Everyone loses. And nobody has a replacement ready because Doflamingo spent 20 years making sure nobody could replace him. He was a single point of failure in a global system. And Luffy broke him. So when I say Luffy crashed the economy, I'm not being dramatic. I'm not exaggerating for effect. Every major conflict from Whole Cake Island forward happens because Doflamingo isn't there anymore. Big Mum goes after the Straw Hats partially because she's losing influence and needs to reassert dominance. Kaido accelerates his plans in Wano because he doesn't have a steady Smile supply anymore and needs to consolidate what he has. The world government starts panicking about maintaining control, which leads to the increased CP0 activity we see in Wano and later in Egghead. Cross-guild forms because there's a power vacuum in the underworld and Crocodile sees an opportunity to fill it. All of this, all of the chaos of the post-Dressrosa world traces back to removing one man who was systemically important to how the world functioned, and the beautiful irony is that Luffy has no idea. He didn't defeat Doflamingo to crash the economy. He defeated Doflamingo because Doflamingo hurt his friends. But the economic consequences are going to be what defines the endgame, not the moral ones. And here's the part that should terrify you. Doflamingo is in Impel Down right now. He's alive. He's imprisoned, sure, but he's alive and he still has all the knowledge. He still knows who bought what from whom. He still has the blackmail. And if anyone ever breaks him out, if Blackbeard raids Impel Down again, if the Revolutionary Army decides they need leverage against the world government, if Cross-Guild decides they need a consultant, Doflamingo walks back into the world with a complete map of the global economy's pressure points. He's not just a former villain, he's a ticking time bomb, and the fuse is already lit. So Doflamingo was the middleman, the untouchable broker who connected everyone. But what was he actually selling? Because when people think about Doflamingo's operation, they think he made fake devil fruits for Kaido, and they leave it at that. They treat smile fruits like a product, like widgets coming off an assembly line, and that's wrong. Smile fruits weren't products, they were currency. They were the medium of exchange in a three-way trade agreement between Doflamingo, Kaido and Caesar Clown that functioned like a central banking system for the criminal underworld. And when you actually map out how the money and goods flowed between these three parties, you realise this wasn't a criminal enterprise. This was monetary policy. This was a private Federal Reserve operating outside government oversight, and the fruits were just the physical representation of value being transferred between parties who couldn't use normal currency because normal currency would create a paper trail. Let me break down the actual supply chain because this is where it gets fascinating. Chapter 6. 89. Punk Hazard, Caesar Clown. Explains that he manufactures a chemical substance called SAD. SAD is the core ingredient needed to produce SMRIOL fruits. Without SAD, you can't make SORMASLES. Caesar is the only person who knows how to make SAD because he invented it. So Caesar has a monopoly on the production of the base material. Now, Caesar doesn't care about smile fruits. He's a scientist, not a farmer. What he cares about is funding for his research, protection from the Marines who want to arrest him for his war crimes, and access to test subjects for his experiments. So Caesar makes SAD and gives it to Doflamingo. And what does Doflamingo give Caesar in return? Money, yes. But more importantly, Caesar gives Doflamingo the SAD. Doflamingo manufactures the smile fruits using the Tontata dwarves as forced labour in the underground factory in Dressrosa. And then Doflamingo sells the smile fruits to Kaido. Now here's where it becomes a currency system instead of just a sale. Kaido doesn't pay Doflamingo in berries. Kaido pays Doflamingo in weapons. Chapter 7. 95. After Doflamingo falls, Kaido is furious. Not because he lost a business partner, but because his supply of smile fruits got cut off. And we learn from the Wano arc, specifically chapter 929, when we see CP0 dealing with Orochi, that Kaido has been manufacturing weapons in Wano using the liquor iron ore and slave labour. These weapons are extremely valuable because they're made with sea stone, which is rare and difficult to work with, and because Wano's smithing techniques are advanced. So Kaido gives Doflamingo weapons. Doflamingo takes those weapons and sells them to multiple buyers, including the world government via CP0, various kingdoms, and other criminal organisations. Doflamingo uses the money from selling Kaido's weapons to pay Caesar for SAD production. Caesar uses that money to fund his research and buy equipment, and the cycle continues. But here's the key insight. The smile fruits themselves aren't the point. The point is that the smile fruits create a barter system that obscures the actual flow of money. Follow the logic. If Kaido wanted to buy weapons from the world government directly, he couldn't, because the world government is publicly at war with him. If the world government wanted to sell weapons to Kaido directly, they couldn't, because it would be treason. But if Kaido gives weapons to Doflamingo, and Doflamingo sells those weapons to the world government while separately selling smile fruits to Kaido, then on paper it looks like two separate transactions. It looks like Kaido is buying fruit and the world government is buying weapons, and there's no direct connection between them. Except there is. The connection is Doflamingo, and the smile fruits are the invoice. They're the receipt that proves the transaction happened. Every smile fruit Kaido receives represents a certain quantity of weapons that entered the market, some of which went to the world government. It's a ledger, it's bookkeeping, it's double entry accounting for war profiteering. Now let's talk about why Kaido even wants smile fruits, because this is another thing people misunderstand. They think Kaido wants to build an army of devil fruit users to make his crew stronger, and sure, that's part of it. But the actual economics don't support that being the primary motive. Chapter 9. 43. Wano. We see the Smile Factory in Udon Prison, and we learn that smile fruits have a success rate of about 10%. That means 90% of people who eat a smile fruit either get no power at all and just lose the ability to swim, or they become pleasures. People who get a permanent side effect like uncontrollable laughter but no actual ability. That's a horrific success rate for a product you're paying premium prices for. If Kaido just wanted devil fruit users, he could raid the black market for real devil fruits and have a 100% success rate. But he doesn't do that. He buys S. Why? Because smile fruits aren't about building an army. They're about maintaining a trade relationship. Kaido needs Doflamingo's network to move his weapons. Doflamingo needs Kaido's weapons to sell to his clients. And the smile fruits are the excuse for the relationship to exist. Think about it from a business perspective. Kaido is manufacturing weapons in Wano at massive scale. He needs buyers for those weapons or the production is pointless. But Kaido can't sell directly to most of his potential customers because he's a wanted criminal and most kingdoms won't publicly deal with him. So he needs a broker. He needs someone with legitimate cover who can take the weapons and distribute them without the trail leading back to Kaido. That's Doflamingo. And Doflamingo needs a reason to maintain this relationship with Kaido that doesn't make it obvious he's laundering weapons. So the smile fruits become the cover story. I'm not selling Kaido's weapons to the world government. I'm buying fruit from him. Sounds a lot better than I'm facilitating an arms deal between a Yonko and the Marines. And Caesar's role in this is even more brilliant because Caesar is the choke point. He's the single point of failure in the entire system. If Caesar stops making sad, the smile production stops. If the smile production stops, Doflamingo has no reason to keep buying weapons from Kaido. If Doflamingo stops buying weapons, Kaido's entire manufacturing operation in Wano becomes worthless because he has no distribution network. So Caesar, this relatively weak scientist who would get one shot by any serious fighter, has leverage over one of the four emperors. Not because he's strong, because he controls the supply of the one commodity Kaido can't get anywhere else. That's economic power. That's what being systemically important looks like. And the beautiful irony is that Caesar probably doesn't even fully understand this. He thinks he's just getting paid to make chemicals. He doesn't realise he's the linchpin in a trade agreement between a warlord and an emperor. Now let me show you why this is a central banking system and not just a supply chain. Central banks control the money supply. They regulate how much currency is in circulation. They set the terms of credit. And they maintain stability by ensuring that everyone who participates in the economy has access to the medium of exchange. Doflamingo's operation does all of these things for the criminal underworld. He controls the supply of smile fruits by controlling Caesar, which means he controls how much currency Kaido has access to. He sets the exchange rate between weapons and fruits, which means he determines the value of Kaido's manufacturing output. And he maintains stability by ensuring that both Kaido and the world government can trade without exposing their relationship, which keeps both parties dependent on him. If Doflamingo decides to cut off the smile supply, Kaido's weapons stockpile becomes worthless because he has no way to monetize it. If Doflamingo decides to stop selling weapons to the world government, the government loses access to sea stone ammunition and advanced arms. Doflamingo is literally too big to fail because both sides of the conflict need him to keep the war economy running. And this is why Luffy defeating Doflamingo had such catastrophic consequences. When Doflamingo fell, the central bank collapsed. Kaido lost access to Smile Fruits, which meant his trade agreement with Doflamingo ended. The weapons stockpile in Wano suddenly had no buyer. Caesar got captured and then escaped, but he wasn't producing SAD anymore because his lab on Punk Hazard was destroyed and he didn't have Doflamingo's protection. The world government lost their back channel to Kaido's weapons, which forced CP0 to start dealing directly with Orochi and Wano, which is riskier and more exposed. The entire system broke. And what happens when a currency system breaks? Hyperinflation, chaos, people scrambling to find alternative stores of value, which is exactly what we see in the post-Dressrosa arcs. Big Mum trying to secure her position by arranging political marriages. Kaido accelerating his plans in Wano because he knows he's vulnerable without his trade network. The world government increasing military presence everywhere because they've lost economic control and they're trying to compensate with force. The Smile Factory wasn't a factory, it was a mint. It was where Doflamingo printed money, and when Luffy shut it down, he didn't just stop production of a product, he collapsed a currency. He destroyed the medium of exchange that three major powers were using to trade with each other, and none of them have recovered. That's what makes Doflamingo's defeat so much more important than people realise. It's not about good defeating evil, it's about accidentally destroying financial infrastructure and watching the entire global economy scramble to adapt. So we've established that Doflamingo was running a private central bank and that Smile Fruits were currency in a weapons trade between a warlord and an emperor. But here's the part that most people don't want to acknowledge because it's too uncomfortable. The biggest customer in this entire system wasn't Kaido, it was the world government. The people who are supposed to be maintaining law and order, who are supposed to be stopping the slave trade and the weapons trafficking and the production of artificial devil fruits, were the primary beneficiaries of all of it. The celestial dragons were buying slaves from Doflamingo's auction houses. The Marines were buying weapons manufactured by Kaido and brokered by Doflamingo. CP0 was actively protecting Doflamingo's operations because if Doflamingo fell, the government's supply chains collapsed. The world government didn't just tolerate Doflamingo's criminal empire, they were his anchor tenant. They were the Walmart to his strip mall. And when Fujitora let Doflamingo fall during Dressrosa, he wasn't just catching a criminal, he was committing economic terrorism against his own employers. Let's start with the most viscerally disgusting part of this equation, the human auction house on Sabaody Archipelago. Chapter 4, 96 through 5. 02. The Straw Hats arrive at Sabaody and discover that there's a legal slave trade operating in broad daylight. Disco, the auction house manager, is selling human beings, fishmen, giants and mermaids to the highest bidder. And the primary buyers, the VIP customers who get private seating and guaranteed purchase rights, are the celestial dragons. Chapter 5. 01. We see St. Charlos purchase Camille the mermaid for 500 million berries without blinking. 500 million. For context, that's higher than most pirate bounties at that point in the series. That's more than the entire Straw Hat crew's combined bounty after Eni's lobby. And Charlos treats it like pocket change because to him it is. The Celestial Dragons have infinite money because they can tax the entire world, and they spend that money on human beings. Now, here's the connection people miss. Disco works for Doflamingo. Chapter 5. 04. After Luffy punches a celestial dragon and causes chaos, Disco tries to call his boss for instructions and we see that his boss is Joker. Doflamingo owns the auction house. Not through some shell company or intermediary. He directly owns it and Disco reports to him, which means every slave sold through that auction house, every transaction, every celestial dragon who walked in and bought a person, was participating in Doflamingo's business. The world government knew this, they had to know this, because the auction house operates on Sabaody, which is right next to Marine headquarters. It's not hidden in some remote corner of the world, it's in the government's backyard, and not only do they allow it, they protect it. There are Marines stationed on Sabaody specifically to prevent interference with the auction house's operations. So let's follow the money. Doflamingo runs the auction house. The Celestial Dragons buy slaves from the auction house. The money goes to Doflamingo. Doflamingo uses that money to pay Caesar for sad production and to maintain his operations in Dressrosa and to broker weapons deals. Which means the Celestial Dragon's slave purchases are funding the entire Smile operation, which is funding Kaido's weapons manufacturing, which is producing weapons that get sold back to the world government. The Celestial Dragons are paying for their own military's ammunition by buying slaves. It's a circular flow of money where the government funds the criminal underworld that supplies the government. That's not a black market existing in the shadows. That's a fully integrated economy where crime and law enforcement are the same business with different departments. And the world government can't admit this. They can't acknowledge that their ruling class is addicted to slavery and that addiction is propping up the entire illegal arms trade. So they maintain plausible deniability. They pretend the auction house is just a rogue operation they haven't gotten around to shutting down yet. They pretend Doflamingo is just a warlord doing warlord things and they're monitoring him. They pretend CP0 is investigating him when actually CP0 is coordinating with him. It's all theatre, it's all kayfabe. And the proof that it's theatre comes in chapter 725, Dressrosa, when CP0 shows up not to arrest Doflamingo but to help him. Chapter 725. Doflamingo is backed into a corner. Luffy and Law are destroying his operations. The truth about the toy house is getting exposed. The citizens of Dressrosa are turning against him. And what does the world government do? They fake a news report. Big News Morgans, who we'll talk about extensively later, publishes a story saying that Doflamingo has resigned from the warlords and abdicated his throne. It's a complete fabrication. Doflamingo hasn't resigned. But the government plants the story to make it look like they've already dealt with him, which buys Doflamingo time to activate the birdcage and try to kill everyone who knows the truth. The world government actively assists in a cover-up operation for a man who's running slave auctions and weapons trafficking, and they do it because if Doflamingo goes down while he's still conscious and able to talk, he's going to expose every deal he ever brokered for them. He's going to name names. He's going to show receipts. And this is where Fujitora's role becomes fascinating, because Fujitora is one of the only people in the Marines who understands what's actually happening and deliberately chooses to tank it anyway. Chapter 793. After Luffy defeats Doflamingo, Fujitora makes a public apology to King Riku and the citizens of Dressrosa. He bows. An admiral of the Marines bows to civilians and admits the world government failed them. And Sakazuki, the fleet admiral, is furious. He's furious not because Fujitora let Doflamingo get defeated, but because Fujitora admitted fault. Because that admission of fault acknowledges that the world government knew what Doflamingo was doing and allowed it. It breaks the kayfabe. It admits that the government isn't protecting people, it's exploiting them, and Fujitora knows this. He knows that by letting Doflamingo fall and then publicly apologising, he's forcing the government to acknowledge their complicity. He's committing institutional suicide by truth-telling. Think about what Fujitora actually did from an economic perspective. He removed a critical node in the government's supply chain and then prevented them from spinning the narrative to protect themselves. That's sabotage. That's a senior executive deliberately crashing his own company's stock price because he's morally opposed to what the company does. And the consequences are immediate. The government loses access to Doflamingo's weapons distribution network. They lose their back channel to Kaido. They lose control over the Smile currency system. And they can't replace Doflamingo because Doflamingo spent 20 years making himself irreplaceable. Nobody else has his connections. Nobody else has his leverage over both the Celestial Dragons and the Emperors. Nobody else can broker deals at that level. So when Fujitora lets him fall, the government goes into crisis mode. They start scrambling. CP0 gets sent directly to Wano to deal with Orochi because they can't go through a middleman anymore. They start increasing military presence across the world because they've lost economic control and they're trying to compensate with force. Fujitora didn't just arrest a criminal, he crashed the government's black budget operations. Now here's the part that should make your skin crawl. The government knew all of this was going to happen, and they tried to stop it anyway. Chapter 7. 27. During the Dressrosa climax, CP0 agents are literally present in Dressrosa watching the events unfold, and they don't help the Marines arrest Doflamingo. They don't help Luffy defeat him, they just observe, because their orders aren't to enforce justice. Their orders are to protect the government's interests. And the government's interests are served by keeping Doflamingo operational, even if that means letting him massacre the citizens of Dressrosa with the birdcage. CP0 would rather let thousands of people die than lose their weapons supplier. That's the calculus. That's the actual priority structure. And it's not because the government is cartoonishly evil, it's because they're dependent. They're addicted to the system Doflamingo built, and withdrawal would be catastrophic. So when the Celestial Dragons buy slaves, they're not just being cruel, they're funding military operations. When the Marines buy weapons from Doflamingo, they're not just being pragmatic, they're enabling human trafficking. Every transaction in this system feeds every other transaction. The slavery funds the weapons trade. The weapons trade funds the Smile production. The Smile production maintains the relationship with Kaido. The relationship with Kaido produces more weapons. And the government sits at the center of this circle, pretending they're not part of it, pretending they're fighting against it, when actually they're the biggest customer in the room. They needed Doflamingo alive. Not because they liked him, not because they approved of his methods, but because their entire economy depended on him being the middleman. And Fujitora understood this. And he let Doflamingo fall anyway. And the government has been in freefall ever since, desperately trying to rebuild supply chains that shouldn't have existed in the first place. That's why Doflamingo's final words in chapter 793 are so important. He's laughing as they arrest him, and he says the era is going to go out of control, that someone's going to find the treasure and the world will be turned upside down. He's not making a prediction, he's stating a fact. Because he knows that removing him from the equation destabilizes everything. He knows the government can't function without him. And he knows they're going to collapse under the weight of their own corruption eventually. He's not afraid of being imprisoned. He's amused. Because he won even by losing. He proved the government needs criminals more than it needs justice. And Impel Down is just his retirement plan. So the world government needed Doflamingo alive. CP0 was protecting him. Fujitora sabotaged the whole operation. And Doflamingo himself was backed into a corner by Luffy and Law, destroying his operations piece by piece. But here's what most people misunderstand about the birdcage. They think it was a murder weapon. They think Doflamingo activated it because he's a sadistic psychopath who wanted to kill everyone on Dressrosa out of spite. And sure, Doflamingo absolutely is a sadistic psychopath, that's not in question. But the birdcage wasn't about killing people, it was about killing evidence. It was about destroying the ledger, because Doflamingo knew that if he went down and the records of his transactions survived, if people could trace who bought what from whom, the entire global power structure would be exposed. So the birdcage wasn't a tantrum, it was a controlled demolition, it was a margin call, and Doflamingo was trying to burn the books before the auditors arrived. Let me explain what a margin call actually is, because this metaphor is perfect, and most people don't know the term. In finance, when you borrow money to invest and your investment starts losing value, the lender can issue a margin call. They demand you either put up more money to cover the loss, or they liquidate your position immediately. It's a forced reckoning. You either pay up, or you lose everything right now. And the birdcage is Doflamingo getting margin called by reality. He's losing the fight. His Smile factory is exposed. The toys are turning back into humans and remembering what happened to them. The citizens of Dressrosa are learning he's been manipulating them for a decade. Law is exposing his history. Luffy is beating him physically. Everything is collapsing at once. And Doflamingo realizes he has two options. Either maintain control of the narrative by destroying everyone who knows the truth, or go down and let the truth spread. And he chooses option 1. He chooses to liquidate the position. He activates the birdcage. Chapter 7, 30 through 744, the birdcage sequence. Doflamingo uses his awakened devil fruit power to create a massive dome of razor-sharp strings covering the entire country. The strings cut through buildings, through stone, through anything they touch. And then the dome starts shrinking, slowly, inexorably moving inward toward the center of Dressrosa, cutting through everything in its path. And Doflamingo announces to the entire island that in 1 hour, everyone will be dead. No exceptions, no escape. The birdcage is unbreakable. Even Fujitora, an admiral with gravity powers, can't stop it. Even Zoro, one of the strongest swordsmen in the world, can't cut through it. The strings are too strong, too dense, too reinforced by Doflamingo's Haki. So the only way to stop the birdcage is to defeat Doflamingo himself. And that's the point. Doflamingo is saying, either I win this fight and regain control, or everyone dies and the evidence dies with them. Now let's think about what evidence actually exists in Dressrosa that Doflamingo needs to destroy. First, there's the Toy House and Sugar's operation. Sugar's devil fruit turned people into toys and erased them from everyone's memory. Chapter 7. 42 when Sugar gets knocked out and the toys turn back into humans. Suddenly, hundreds of people who were missing for years reappear. People who remember being enslaved. People who remember Doflamingo's men capturing them. People who remember working in the underground factory producing smile fruits. These people are witnesses. They can testify about what happened. They can describe the operations. They can name the guards, the overseers, the buyers. That's evidence. Second, there's the factory itself. The underground smile production facility with all its equipment, its supply records, its shipment logs. Chapter 7. 08. We see the factory in detail. There are ledgers. There are invoices. There are records of how much sad came in from Caesar, how many smile fruits were produced, where those fruits were shipped. If the Marines actually investigated that factory properly, if they brought in forensic accountants and started tracing the money, they'd discover the entire supply chain. They'd find out that Kaido was the buyer. They'd find out that the weapons came from Wano. They'd find out that CP0 was facilitating some of the transactions. The factory isn't just a crime scene, it's a paper trail. And paper trails lead to people who don't want to be found. Third, there's Doflamingo's personal staff. The executives of his operation. People like Tribol, Diamante, Pika, and the other officers who manage different aspects of his business. These people know things. They know who the clients were. They know which nobles bought slaves. They know which marine officers took bribes. They know which kingdoms purchased weapons illegally. And some of them, under interrogation, might talk. Might make deals to reduce their sentences. Might trade information for immunity. Doflamingo can't risk that. He can't risk his entire organisation getting flipped by the Marines and everyone spilling everything they know. So the birdcage solves that problem. If everyone dies, nobody talks. But here's the most important piece of evidence that Doflamingo needs to destroy. Dressrosa itself. The entire country is evidence. Chapter 7. 45. We learn that Doflamingo took over Dressrosa 10 years ago by using his string fruit to control King Riku and make him attack his own citizens. He framed Riku for tyranny, positioned himself as a saviour and took the throne. But the people who were there 10 years ago remember the truth. They remember that Riku was a good king. They remember the night he went crazy. They remember Doflamingo showing up right after with an army and restoring order. And now that the toys are turning back into humans, now that people are remembering the missing decade, they're starting to connect the dots. They're realising Doflamingo manufactured the crisis that brought him to power. And if that story spreads, if it gets out to the world that a warlord committed a false flag operation to steal a country, it raises questions about how many other warlords did similar things. It makes people wonder what else the world government is allowing or covering up. It undermines the entire warlord system's legitimacy, and the government can't allow that. So Doflamingo's calculus with the birdcage is actually pretty simple. If he kills everyone on Dressrosa, the evidence dies with them, the factory burns, the witnesses die. His officers can't be interrogated because they're dead. The citizens can't testify because they're dead. And Doflamingo can claim afterward that he was fighting terrorists who activated some kind of weapon, and the birdcage was his attempt to contain it. He can spin it, he can control the narrative, but only if there are no survivors to contradict him. The birdcage is a factory reset. It's wiping the hard drive before the police confiscate the computer. It's burning the evidence locker. And it's brilliant in a horrifying way because it puts all the pressure on Luffy. Either Luffy defeats Doflamingo in time, or Doflamingo wins by default because everyone who could expose him is dead. And here's the really dark implication. The world government might have been okay with this outcome. Think about it. CP0 is present in Dressrosa. They're watching the birdcage happen. And they don't intervene. They don't help stop it. Chapter 7. 27, they're just observing. And the reason they're observing instead of acting is because the birdcage solves a problem for them, too. If Doflamingo succeeds in killing everyone, the government's connection to his operations dies with them. The evidence that CP0 was coordinating with a criminal, that the Celestial Dragons were buying slaves from him, that the Marines were purchasing Kaido's weapons through him, all of that evidence gets destroyed. The government gets plausible deniability. They can say, "We had no idea Doflamingo was doing all this, we were investigating him, and unfortunately, he went rogue and killed everyone before we could stop him." They can make him the scapegoat for their own crimes. So from the government's perspective, the birdcage is actually a feature, not a bug. It's cleanup. It's tying up loose ends. And if Luffy hadn't defeated Doflamingo in time, if the birdcage had completed its shrinking and killed everyone, the government would have publicly condemned Doflamingo while privately being relieved that the audit got cancelled. But Luffy did defeat him. Chapter 7. 90. Gear 4th. King Kong, gun to the face, Doflamingo goes down, the birdcage collapses. And suddenly all the evidence survives. The factory is intact, the witnesses are alive, the records exist. And the world government has to do damage control. They have to arrest Doflamingo quickly and quietly. They have to seize the factory and classify everything they find. They have to intimidate or pay off witnesses. They have to spin the story so it looks like Doflamingo was a rogue actor and not a valued business partner. And they mostly succeed. Most of the world never learns the full scope of what was happening in Dressrosa. But the people who need to know, the people who are paying attention, they know. Kaido knows he lost his supplier. Big Mum knows the underworld is unstable. The Revolutionary Army knows the government is vulnerable. And all of them start making moves based on that knowledge. The birdcage failed to destroy the evidence, so the evidence destroyed the system instead. That's what makes Dressrosa so pivotal. It's not just a Luffy victory, it's a failed cover-up. It's what happens when the margin call doesn't succeed, when the emergency liquidation gets stopped halfway, and suddenly everyone can see the books. And the books show that the entire economy is fraudulent, that the legitimate government and the criminal underworld are the same organisation, that the warlord system is a money laundering scheme. That slavery isn't an unfortunate side effect of piracy, it's a core business model that the Celestial Dragons depend on. The birdcage was supposed to bury all of that, and it didn't. So now the world is finding out, and the consequences are still unfolding. So the birdcage failed, the evidence survived and Doflamingo got arrested, and now we need to trace what actually happened to the One Piece world in the aftermath. Because this is where it becomes undeniable that Luffy didn't just defeat a villain. He triggered a global financial crisis. Every major conflict from Whole Cake Island to Wano to the Reverie to Egghead to the formation of Cross Guild, all of it traces back to the economic instability created when the middleman disappeared. And the beautiful irony is that Luffy has absolutely no idea. He thinks he just saved Dressrosa from a bad guy. He doesn't know he crashed the market. He doesn't know he's the 2008 housing crisis in human form, but everyone else knows. And they're all scrambling to adapt to the new reality where the central bank of crime is gone and nobody has a replacement ready. Let's start with the most immediate reaction. Chapter 795, just a few chapters after Doflamingo's defeat, we see Kaido on Onigashima. And he's furious, not disappointed, not concerned, absolutely enraged. He's drinking heavily, smashing furniture, and screaming about Doflamingo being defeated. His subordinates are terrified because they know what this means. Jack, one of Kaido's top commanders, literally says Joker has been defeated, not Doflamingo. Joker, they're not upset about losing an ally in a general sense. They're upset about losing their supplier. Their smile fruit supply just got cut off. The currency they were using to trade for weapons just evaporated. And more importantly, the distribution network Doflamingo provided for selling those weapons is gone. Kaido was manufacturing weapons in Wano at industrial scale, and Doflamingo was the one moving those weapons to buyers across the world. Without Doflamingo, Kaido has warehouses full of product and no way to monetize it. And you can see Kaido's response to this crisis play out across the Wano arc. Chapter 9. 29. We learn that CP0 has been dealing directly with Orochi to purchase weapons, not through Doflamingo, directly, which means the world government was so desperate to maintain the supply chain that they had to burn their plausible deniability and engage with Wano openly, and Kaido's entire strategy in Wano accelerates. He's not slowly building an army of Smile users anymore because he doesn't have a steady supply of Smile fruits. Instead, he's pivoting to his backup plan, finding the One Piece himself Gimjoy, getting the ancient weapons, and forcing a direct confrontation with the world government. Doflamingo's fall didn't just inconvenience Kaido, it changed his entire timeline. It forced him to speed up his endgame because his economic foundation just collapsed. Now, let's look at Big Mum, because her reaction is even more interesting. Chapter 8. 60 Whole Cake Island Arc. We meet the 6 Underworld Emperors at Big Mum's tea party. Morgans, Stussy, Dufeld, Umit, Giberson, and Drug Peklo. All of them are there because Big Mum is trying to consolidate power in the underworld. And why is she trying to consolidate power in the underworld right now, at this specific moment? Because Doflamingo just fell, because there's a vacuum, because whoever can position themselves as the new broker, the new middleman, the new central bank, will have leverage over everyone. Big Mum isn't throwing a party for fun, she's hosting a business summit. She's trying to forge alliances with the people who control media, shipping, finance, warehousing, and death. She's trying to rebuild the network that Doflamingo represented, and it's not working. Chapter 8. 67. The tea party descends into chaos. The assassination attempt on Big Mum happens. Luffy causes havoc, the whole thing falls apart, and Big Mum's response is telling. She goes into a rage, chases the Straw Hats, and becomes increasingly unstable throughout Whole Cake Island and into Wano. That's not just her personality, that's desperation. She knows she's losing ground. She knows she doesn't have the economic infrastructure to maintain her position. And she's right. But here's where it gets really fascinating. The world government's response. Because the government didn't just lose a supplier, they lost their ability to wage war covertly. Chapter 1. 1028. Wano, CP0 is literally inside Onigashima during the raid. They're there to ensure that whoever wins the battle between Kaido and Luffy, the weapons trade continues. They explicitly state that their orders are to prevent the deal with Orochi from falling through. They don't care if Kaido wins or if Kaido loses. They care about the guns. They care about the sea stone bullets. They care about maintaining the supply of weapons that they've been purchasing through Doflamingo's network and then directly from Wano. And when it becomes clear that Luffy is going to win, when it becomes clear that Kaido is going to fall, CP0 makes a desperate move. Chapter 1. 1043. They interfere in the fight. They try to distract Luffy during his battle with Kaido, not to help Kaido win, to prevent Luffy from winning too decisively, because if Luffy wins and takes over Wano, the weapons supply is threatened. They're literally sabotaging their own side's victory because the economic consequences of losing Wano are worse than the political consequences of Kaido staying in power. Think about what that means. The world government, the supposed guardians of peace and justice, would rather leave a tyrannical emperor in control of a nation than lose access to a weapons factory. That's the priority structure. That's what Doflamingo's fall exposed. Because when Doflamingo was operating, the government could maintain the fiction that they were fighting the emperors while secretly trading with them. Doflamingo provided the buffer, the plausible deniability, the ability to say, we're not dealing with Kaido, we're dealing with a warlord, and what that warlord does with the money we pay him is his business. But without Doflamingo, They have to go direct. And going direct means admitting the relationship, means exposing the hypocrisy, and they're doing it anyway because they have no choice. The war machine needs fuel, the economy needs weapons, and if the only source is a genocidal dragon, then they deal with the dragon. And then there's the Revolutionary Army, who saw Doflamingo's fall as an opportunity. Chapter 9. 05. The Reverie Arc. We see Sabo and the revolutionary commanders infiltrate Mary Joai's, and their timing is not coincidental. They attack during the Reverie because the world government is vulnerable, because Doflamingo's fall disrupted the government's intelligence networks and supply chains, making it harder for them to respond to threats. Because with the underworld in chaos, the government can't rely on their usual back channels for information. Sabo and his team get farther into Mary Joai's than anyone has in centuries. They discover Imu. They witness something so shocking that Sabo has to immediately report it to Dragon. And while we still don't know exactly what they saw, we know the Revolutionary Army has been acting with increased aggression ever since. Chapter 1. 83 through 185. Sabo's Revelations. Whatever he discovered, it's connected to the economic vulnerabilities exposed by Doflamingo's fall. The Revolutionary Army knows the government is scrambling, and they're pressing the advantage. And finally, there's Cross-Guild. Chapter 1. 1056. Post-Wano, we learn that Crocodile and Mihawk have joined forces with Buggy to create a new organisation that's hunting Marines. They're issuing bounties on Marine officers, reversing the entire power dynamic of the bounty system. And this only makes sense in the context of Doflamingo's fall creating a power vacuum. Crocodile is a businessman. He ran Baroque Works as a criminal enterprise with clear economic goals. And when Doflamingo fell, Crocodile saw an opportunity to fill that void, to become the new broker, the new middleman. But instead of just recreating Doflamingo's model, he's innovating. He's weaponizing the underworld against the government by creating a market for marine captures. He's turning every pirate, every bounty hunter, every criminal into a potential contractor for Cross-Guild. It's brilliant. It's a hostile takeover of the underworld masked as a pirate alliance. And it only works because Doflamingo isn't there anymore to compete with him. So here's the synthesis. Doflamingo falls. Kaido loses his supplier and accelerates his timeline, leading to the raid on Onigashima. Big Mom tries to consolidate underworld power and fails, leading to her increasing instability and eventual defeat in Wano. The world government loses plausible deniability and has to engage directly with their criminal partners, exposing their hypocrisy. The Revolutionary Army exploits the chaos to infiltrate Mary Joai's and discover world-shaking secrets. And Crocodile builds Cross-Guild to fill the power vacuum and weaponize the underworld against the Marines. Every single one of these events is a direct consequence of removing the middleman. Every single one of these conflicts happens because the economic infrastructure collapsed and nobody had a plan to replace it. And Luffy caused all of it by punching one guy really hard. He's not trying to overthrow the world order, he's not trying to crash the economy, he just wanted to help his friend and save a country. But the unintended consequences of his actions are reshaping the entire geopolitical landscape. He's the butterfly flapping its wings in Dressrosa that causes the hurricane everywhere else. He's the housing default that triggers the global financial crisis. And he still doesn't know. He's just going to keep punching people who hurt his friends. And he's going to keep accidentally destroying the systems that hold the world together. And by the time he finds the One Piece, he's going to have dismantled the entire global economy without ever intending to. That's what makes him terrifying, not his strength. His complete lack of awareness about the economic ramifications of his violence. Luffy is a bull in a china shop, except the china shop is the world economy and the bull has a rubber body and conquers Haki. That's Doflamingo's legacy. Not the Smile Factory, not the weapons trade, not even the slavery. His legacy is proving that the entire One Piece world economy is built on the presence of one untouchable middleman. And when you remove that middleman, everything falls apart. And it's still falling apart. The crisis is ongoing. We're living in the post-Doflamingo economic collapse right now in the manga. And it's only going to get worse. So we've spent the last 40 plus minutes talking about Doflamingo as an economic system, about smile fruits as currency, about the world government as complicit customers. But we haven't talked about what these commodities actually are. We haven't examined the products themselves. And I need you to understand that when I say the underworld trades in 5 specific commodities, I'm not being abstract. I'm not talking about generic crime. I'm talking about artificial life, weapons of mass destruction, human beings, performance-enhancing drugs, and information. And every single one of these commodities exists because someone in a position of authority decided that the moral cost was acceptable if the economic benefit was high enough. So this saga is going to be uncomfortable. This saga is going to make you look at arcs you've already read and realize you missed how dark they actually were. Because Oda doesn't put content warnings on his chapters. He just shows you children being experimented on and expects you to connect the dots. Let's start with SAD, because SAD is the foundation of the smile economy and nobody talks about what SAD actually is. Chapter 6. 89. Punk Hazard, Caesar Clown explains that SAD is a special chemical compound he invented that's required to manufacture smile artificial devil fruits. Without SAD, you can't make smiles. It's the essential ingredient. And Caesar is the only person who knows how to produce it because he invented the formula. So far, so straightforward. It's just a chemical. Except it's not just a chemical. Because if you actually pay attention to the Punk Hazard arc, if you track what Caesar is doing and who he's doing it to, you realise that SAD production requires human experimentation. It requires test subjects. It requires children. Chapter 6, 63 through 675, the Punk Hazard children subplot. There are dozens of children imprisoned in Caesar's lab. They've been kidnapped from their families. They're being told they're sick, that they need medicine, that Caesar is helping them, but they're not sick. They're test subjects. Caesar is giving them drugs that are making them grow larger. Chapter 6. 75. Chopper examines the children and discovers they've been given a stimulant drug that's forcing rapid growth and creating dependency. The children are addicted. They're in withdrawal when they don't get their doses. And Caesar has been doing this for years. He's been refining the formula. He's been testing different compounds on different children to see what works. And the medicine he's giving them isn't meant to cure them. It's meant to generate data. Data about how artificial substances interact with human biology, data about growth stimulation, data about creating artificial devil fruit users. Now, here's the connection that the story implies but doesn't explicitly state. The research Caesar is doing on the children is the same research that allows him to produce SAAD. Think about what smile fruits do. They're artificial devil fruits that attempt to give people Zoan transformations. But they have a 10% success rate, and the 90% who fail either get no power or become pleasures who suffer permanent side effects. That's not a design flaw. That's incomplete research. That's what happens when you're trying to replicate a natural phenomenon through artificial means, and you don't fully understand the underlying biology. And the way you improve the success rate, the way you refine the formula is through testing, through experimentation, through seeing what happens when you give different compounds to living subjects and tracking the results. And Caesar can't test on adults because adults are harder to control, harder to deceive, and more likely to resist. So he uses children. Children who trust doctors, children who don't understand what's happening to them, children who can be told they're sick and will believe it. So when Doflamingo is selling smile fruits to Kaido, when Kaido is feeding those fruits to his subordinates and watching 90% of them fail, every single one of those fruits represents data extracted from a kidnapped child. Every smile fruit that works, that successfully grants a Zoan transformation, exists because Caesar figured out the right chemical balance by testing on children until the formula stabilized. And every smile fruit that fails, that turns someone into a pleasure who can only laugh and can't express any other emotion, represents a failed experiment that was deemed close enough to ship. The pleasures aren't just unlucky, they're experiencing the same side effects the children experienced, the same uncontrollable physical responses, the same loss of agency over their own bodies. Smile. Fruits are weaponized child abuse. They're taking the data extracted from experimenting on kidnapped children and packaging it as a product. And here's what makes this absolutely sickening. The world government knew. Chapter 6. 98. We learn that Punk Hazard used to be a government research facility. It was where Vegapunk worked before he was transferred to other projects. The facility was studying gigantification, trying to create giant soldiers for the Marines. And when Vegapunk's experiments failed, when he deemed the gigantification research too dangerous to continue, the government didn't shut down the facility. They just reassigned it. They let Caesar Clown take over. They let him continue the research using his own methods, and those methods included human experimentation. The government knew Caesar was using children as test subjects because that's what the facility was built for. That's what gigantification research requires. You need to test growth stimulants on living subjects. And the easiest subjects to acquire and control are children. So when the government acts shocked during the Punk Hazard arc, when the Marines show up and discover the children and act horrified, it's theatre. They knew. They knew because they provided the facility. They knew because they looked the other way when Caesar continued operating there after his official expulsion from government service. They knew because some of Caesar's research was probably being funneled back to Vegapunk for analysis. The children weren't collateral damage. They were part of the supply chain. They were the raw material that SAD production required. And when Caesar started selling SAD to Doflamingo, when Doflamingo started manufacturing smile fruits, when Kaido started buying those fruits and feeding them to his army, the entire chain from kidnapped children to failed pleasures to economic collapse was visible. The government just chose not to look at it. Let me make this even more explicit with timeline evidence. Chapter 6. 66, we learn that the Punk Hazard facility was abandoned 4 years before the current timeline because of an accident involving poisonous gas. Except, it wasn't an accident, it was Caesar. Chapter 6. 88. Caesar admits he deliberately released poison gas on the island to test its effectiveness as a weapon. He killed everyone on the island, his own colleagues, the Marines stationed there, everyone, and then he claimed the island for himself and continued his research in secret. And for 4 years, the world government did nothing. They didn't send anyone to investigate. They didn't try to reclaim the facility. They just let Caesar operate there because Caesar was producing SAD, and SAD was fueling the smile trade, and the smile trade was connected to Doflamingo, and Doflamingo was connected to the world government's weapons supply. So they let it continue. They let children get kidnapped and experimented on because stopping it would disrupt the economy. And here's the most damning piece of evidence. Chapter 6. 90. Caesar is literally on the government's payroll. He's being paid for his research. Not officially, not through budget line items that could be audited, but through back channels. Through the same networks Doflamingo uses to move money. The government is funding the child experimentation because the child experimentation produces SAD, and SAD produces SMEM fruits, and SMIMCOE fruits maintain the trade relationship with Kaido, and the trade relationship with Kaido produces weapons, and weapons are what the government needs to maintain control. It's a circle, and children are the input that makes the circle function. So when I say SAD is liquid slavery, I mean it literally. SAD is the liquefied result of enslaving children to extract research data. Every barrel of SAD that Caesar shipped to Dressrosa represents dozens of children who were experimented on. Every smile fruit that Doflamingo sold to Kaido represents a successful iteration of a formula refined through child abuse. And every pleasure in Kaido's army, every person who ate a smile fruit and lost the ability to express emotion except laughter, is living proof that the formula was never perfected, that the research is incomplete, that they're walking testaments to ongoing experiments that prioritize economic output over human welfare. And the worst part, it's still happening. Chapter 1, 1069, Vegapunk's flashback. We learn that he's been continuing gigantification research on Egghead. He has his own test subjects. He has his own methods. And while Vegapunk is presented as more ethical than Caesar, as someone who regrets the moral costs of his research, He's still doing it. He's still trying to create artificial giants. He's still experimenting with human biology. The government is still funding it because they need the results. They need soldiers. They need weapons. They need ways to compete with the natural advantages of races like the giants and the Lunarians. And if the research requires test subjects, if it requires people who didn't consent to being experimented on, then that's the price the government is willing to pay. SAD isn't a chemical. It's industrialized childhood trauma packaged as a commodity and sold to fund wars. And every character who participated in this supply chain, from Caesar to Doflamingo to Kaido to the world government officials who authorized the funding, they all knew. They all made the calculation that the economic benefits outweighed the moral costs. And Luffy destroying the SAD production facility in Punk Hazard didn't just hurt Kaido's army, it saved children. Children who would have been the next test subjects. Children who would have been kidnapped and experimented on to produce the next batch of SAD. Luffy didn't know that's what he was doing. He was just stopping Caesar because Caesar was a bad guy. But the unintended consequence of his violence was shutting down a child experimentation operation that the world government was actively funding. That's what makes Luffy dangerous. He accidentally does the right thing, and the right thing destroys economies. So Sayed was the product Doflamingo bought from Caesar using money he got from selling weapons. But where did those weapons come from? Who was manufacturing them? And more importantly, who was buying them? Because this is where we get receipts. This is where the implied becomes explicit. This is where Oda stops hinting and starts showing you in canonical manga panels that the world government was purchasing military equipment from Kaido, not through intermediaries, not with plausible deniability. CP0 agents, the highest level of Cypher Pole, the people who report directly to the Celestial Dragons, were in Wano making deals with Orochi to buy weapons manufactured in Kaido's factories. And those weapons were being distributed to Marines, which means every time a Marine fired a sea stone bullet at a pirate, there was a non-zero chance that bullet was made in Wano, sold by Kaido's regime, brokered through Doflamingo's network, and purchased with government funds. The world government was arming itself with weapons made by its enemies, and we have the chapter citations to prove it. Chapter 9, 29, Wano Act 2, CP0 arrives at the flower capital. 3 agents in white suits and masks appear in Orochi's palace, and Orochi is terrified. He's sweating, he's stammering, he's clearly afraid of these people. And the CP0 agents say something that should have made the entire fandom stop and scream. They're there to discuss the trade agreement, not to arrest Orochi for collaborating with Kaido, not to liberate Wano from tyranny, to discuss the trade agreement. They explicitly state that they're there on behalf of the world government to ensure that Wano continues producing weapons, and that the delivery schedule remains on track. This isn't subtext. This isn't implied. CP0 is openly conducting business with a nation under the control of one of the 4 emperors. And they're doing it casually, like it's routine, like this is just another Tuesday for them. Now let's examine what Wano was actually producing, because the weapons aren't generic swords and guns. Chapter 9. 42. We see the weapons factory in Udon. It's a massive industrial operation using slave labour, prisoners forced to work in brutal conditions, mining and refining ore. And the ore they're mining is special. It's called liquor iron ore, and it's described as extremely rare and valuable. Chapter 9. 54. We learn that this ore is being used to create weapons that are then shipped out of Wano to buyers across the world. And one of the key features of Wano's weapons manufacturing is that they have access to sea stone. Chapter 9. 24. Sea stone is mentioned as one of Wano's primary exports. Sea stone, the substance that negates devil fruit powers, that allows Marines to restrain devil fruit users, that's used in ammunition to pierce Logia defences. Wano is one of the only places in the world with the knowledge and resources to work with sea stone on an industrial scale, and Kaido controlled it. So let's trace the supply chain with the evidence we have. Kaido occupies Wano and installs Orochi as shogun. Orochi uses the title to legitimize the occupation and maintain control over the population. The population is enslaved and forced to work in weapons factories. Chapter 9. 42 shows this explicitly. Prisoners in Udon are mining ore, refining materials and producing weapons under threat of death. The weapons are manufactured using liquor iron ore and sea stone. These weapons are then sold to multiple buyers, and one of those buyers is the world government via CP0. CP0 takes delivery of the weapons, presumably through Doflamingo's distribution network before his fall and then directly after. The weapons are distributed to marine units across the world, and then those marines use those weapons to fight pirates, including pirates who work for or are allied with Kaido. Do you see the circle? The world government is buying weapons from Kaido to fight Kaido. They're funding his operations by purchasing his products. And Kaido is accepting this arrangement because it's profitable and because it weakens the Marine's moral authority. Every Marine who fires a Wano-made sea stone bullet is advertising that their organisation does business with tyrants. Every time the government purchases weapons from Kaido's regime, they're proving that their stated mission of justice and peace is subordinate to their actual mission of maintaining power through any means necessary. It's not hypocrisy, it's policy. The government doesn't care who they buy from as long as the weapons work and the supply chain stays intact. And here's the evidence that this wasn't a post-Doflamingo emergency measure. Chapter 1. 1028. During the raid on Onigashima, CP0 is present. They're inside the Skull Dome. They're monitoring the battle between Kaido and Luffy, and their explicit orders, stated on panel, are to ensure that regardless of who wins, the weapons trade continues. They don't care if Kaido defeats Luffy. They don't care if Luffy defeats Kaido. They care about maintaining access to Wano's weapons manufacturing. And when it becomes clear that Luffy is going to win, when Kaido is about to fall, CP0 panics. Chapter 1. 1043. They interfere in the fight. They grab Luffy during his final clash with Kaido, creating an opening that Kaido exploits. They're trying to help Kaido win. Not because they like Kaido, not because they support his ideology, but because if Luffy takes over Wano, the weapons supply is threatened. They're sabotaging their own side's victory to protect their supply chain. Think about what this means for every Marine who believes they're fighting for justice. Think about the rank-and-file soldiers who genuinely think they're protecting people from pirates. They're being given weapons manufactured by enslaved citizens of Wano under Kaido's regime. They're being given bullets made from ore mined by prisoners who are worked to death. They're being equipped with tools of oppression created through oppression. And their commanders know this, the admirals know this, the fleet admiral knows this. Because CP0 reports to the Celestial Dragons, not to the Marine chain of command, which means the weapons deals are happening above the Marines' organisational level. But the weapons are still being distributed to Marine units, which means someone in the logistics chain is accepting shipments from Wano and not asking questions about where they came from. And we can price this out approximately using context from the story. Chapter 9. 29. When CP0 is discussing the trade agreement with Orochi, Orochi is clearly in a subordinate position. He's desperate to keep the deal active, which means the government is probably paying premium prices because they have no alternative supplier for sea stone weapons. Doflamingo was taking a cut as the broker before his fall, probably 20 to 30% given standard middleman rates. Kaido was getting the majority of the payment, which he was using to fund his operations in Wano and to pay Doflamingo for smile fruits. So the money flow was on. Government pays CP0, CP0 pays Doflamingo, or Orochi directly post-Dressrosa. Doflamingo Orochi pays Kaido. Kaido uses the money to fund weapons production and to purchase smile fruits. Smile fruit purchases fund Caesar's SAD production. SAD production requires child experimentation. The government's weapons budget is funding child abuse through 4 degrees of separation. And every link in that chain is documented in the manga. Here's the most damning detail. The government could have stopped this at any time. They could have raided Wano. They could have sent admirals to liberate the country and shut down Kaido's operations. They have the military power. Chapter 9, 57. We learn that the government has been avoiding direct confrontation with Wano specifically because it's not a member nation and because Kaido is entrenched there. But that's an excuse. The real reason they don't invade is because invading would disrupt the weapons supply. If they attack Kaido in Wano, they lose access to seastone ammunition. If they lose access to seastone ammunition, their ability to fight devil fruit users is compromised. So they make a calculation. It's cheaper and more effective to buy from Kaido than to fight him, even though fighting him is supposedly their job. Even though liberating Wano would save thousands of lives. The economic incentive outweighs the moral imperative. That's the government's actual policy, and it's not hidden, it's not secret. It's just never explicitly acknowledged. And now Kaido is defeated. Chapter 1. 1050. Luffy wins. Kaido falls into magma and is presumed dead or incapacitated. Wano is liberated. The weapons factories are shut down. Momonosuke takes control as shogun and opens Wano's borders. And the world government just lost their primary supplier of seastone weapons. That's an economic crisis. That's a supply chain disruption that can't be easily replaced because nobody else has Wano's combination of seastone deposits, metalworking expertise, and willingness to trade. The government is going to have to find alternative sources or develop alternative technologies. They're going to have to admit to their own marine forces that the weapons supply is compromised and ration what they have left. And they can't explain why without admitting they were buying from Kaido in the first place. So when the government increases military activity after Wano falls, when they start cracking down on pirates more aggressively, when we see heightened marine presence across the world, it's not because they're feeling confident, it's because they're desperate. They're trying to project strength while their actual military capacity is declining. They lost Doflamingo's distribution network, they lost Kaido's weapons manufacturing, they lost their primary sources of black market military equipment, and they're scrambling to adapt. The government is weaker now than it's been in decades, not because they lost battles, because they lost suppliers. And Luffy doesn't even know he did this to them. He just keeps liberating countries and accidentally destroying the economic infrastructure that makes tyranny profitable. That's the weapons trade. That's the receipts. CP0 in Wano, buying from Orochi, ensuring the supply continues, interfering in battles to protect their suppliers. It's all canon. It's all documented. And it proves that the One Piece world doesn't run on justice or morality. It runs on who can manufacture weapons cheaply and who can pay for them reliably. And the world government will buy from anyone, including the enemies they're publicly claiming to fight, as long as the products are good and the prices are right. So the world government buys weapons from Kaido. They fund child experimentation through the Smile supply chain. And now we need to talk about the commodity that makes all of this possible, the product that funds the Celestial Dragon's lifestyle and generates the capital that flows through the entire underworld economy. Human beings. Specifically, the slave trade operating out of the human auction house on Sabaody archipelago. And here's what everyone gets wrong about the Sabaody arc. They think Luffy shut it down. They think that when he punched St. Charlos in chapter 504 and caused chaos at the auction house, when the Straw Hats freed Kami and fought the Marines and escaped, they ended the slave trade. They didn't. The human auction house is still operating. It reopened. It's still selling people, and the Celestial Dragons are still buying, which means someone is still supplying, and that supply chain never stopped. It just got quieter. Chapter 5. 011. Let me give you the exact economics of the human auction house before Luffy's interference, because people forget how systematic this was. Disco, the auction house manager, is on stage presenting products to buyers. And there's a price list. Humans, baseline, start at 500,000 berries. Dwarves are 500,000, minks are 700,000, long arms and long legs are 700,000, giants are 50 million berries, and mermaids, specifically female mermaids, start at 70 million berries and can go much higher depending on appearance and age. Chapter 5. 01. Kami is being auctioned and the starting bid is 500 million berries. St. Charlos immediately bids that amount without negotiating. 500 million berries for one mermaid. That's not a luxury purchase. That's a status symbol. That's conspicuous consumption on a scale that demonstrates the celestial dragons have effectively infinite money and no moral boundaries. Now, the auction house isn't just selling people randomly, there's infrastructure. Chapter 4. 96. When the Straw Hats arrive at Sabaody, they see slave collars on people walking around. These collars explode if someone tries to remove them or if the slave tries to escape. That's not improvised. That's manufactured technology. Someone is making these collars in bulk. Someone is supplying them to slave traders across the world. And the collars interface with some kind of control system that allows owners to detonate them remotely. That's advanced engineering. That's R&D. That's a product line with ongoing technical support, which means there's an entire industry built around enslaving people and maintaining their enslavement through threat of execution. And disco works for Doflamingo. Chapter 5. 04. When everything goes wrong, when Luffy punches a celestial dragon and the auction descends into chaos, Disco tries to call his boss. He's panicking. He needs instructions. And his boss is Joker. Doflamingo owns the human auction house. He's not just affiliated with it, he owns it outright, which means every slave sold through that auction house, every transaction, every celestial dragon who bought a person gave money to Doflamingo. And Doflamingo used that money to fund his operations in Dressrosa, to pay Caesar for SAD, to maintain his weapons deals with Kaido. The slave trade wasn't a side business for Doflamingo. It was foundational. It was one of his primary revenue streams. And the celestial dragons were his most reliable customers because they had unlimited budgets and insatiable demand. Now, here's the part everyone misses. Chapter 5. 98. Post-time skip, the Straw Hats return to Sabaody. 2 years have passed since they were last there. 2 years since Luffy punched St. Charlos. 2 years since the auction house was raided and shut down. And what do we see? Chapter 5. 98. Page 12. The human auction house is operating again. Different management, yes. Disco is gone, but the building is still there. The business is still running, and there's a line of people outside. Potential buyers, potential sellers. The system rebooted. It took a 2-year hit, probably because Doflamingo was dealing with the fallout from having a celestial dragon assaulted at his establishment. But it came back. The auction house reopened under new management and resumed operations because the demand never stopped. The celestial dragons still wanted slaves, so someone provided them. Let me be very specific about what this means. The human auction house wasn't a Doflamingo-specific operation that died when his involvement was exposed. It's infrastructure. It's a permanent institution on Sabaody that exists because Sabaody is the last island before the Red Line, the last stop before Mary Javis, which makes it the perfect location for celestial dragons to shop before returning home. The auction house has probably existed for decades, maybe centuries, predating Doflamingo's involvement. Doflamingo just owned it during the timeline we see. When he lost control, someone else took over. The business model didn't change. The customer base didn't change. The only thing that changed was management. It's like a franchise. The corporate owner might change, but the store stays open because the demand is consistent. And we can infer who the new owner probably is based on context from later arcs. Chapter 8. 60. Whole Cake Island. We meet the 6 Underworld Emperors at Big Mum's tea party. One of them is Stussy, who's introduced as the Queen of the Pleasure District. Chapter 1. 1072. Egghead. We learn that Stussy is actually a CP0 agent and a clone of Miss Buckingham Stussy created by Mad S. So Stussy is simultaneously an Underworld Emperor who controls the Pleasure District economy, which is a euphemism for prostitution and related services. And she's a world government intelligence agent, which means the government has an embedded operative in the underworld's pleasure industry. And if Stussy controls pleasure districts, and if the human auction house is part of the broader market for human commodities, then it's entirely possible that Stussy either owns or has significant influence over the auction house's current operations. The government didn't shut down the slave trade. They took it over. They made it a controlled operation run by their own agent. Think about what this means for the celestial dragons' purchasing habits. They're not buying slaves from criminals who are operating against the government's wishes. They're buying slaves from a market that the government controls through embedded agents, which means every slave purchase is monitored, every transaction is recorded. The government knows exactly which celestial dragons are buying which people and how much they're paying. And they're allowing it because the slave trade generates enormous amounts of money that flows through the underworld economy, and controlling that flow gives the government leverage over everyone else in the system. They're not fighting slavery. They're taxing it. They're regulating it. They're making sure it happens in controlled environments where they can surveil it and extract value from it. And the slaves themselves, where do they come from? Chapter 5. 01. During the original auction, we see a variety of species being sold. Humans, obviously, but also fishmen, giants, minks, long-limbed tribes. These aren't just random criminals or war prisoners. These are civilians, people who were kidnapped. Chapter 4. 98. Hatchin tells the Straw Hats that he was captured by the Macro Fishmen pirates, who then sold him to the auction house. Hatchin was targeted specifically because he's a fishman, and fishmen are valuable commodities, which means there are pirates, possibly multiple crews, who specialize in kidnapping specific races to sell at auction. It's a hunting economy, and the hunters know which species fetch the highest prices, so they target those demographics specifically. Let's talk about the price list again, because the prices reveal the underlying racism of the system. Baseline humans are the cheapest at 500,000 berries. That's the floor. Every other race is more expensive because they're exotic, because they're rare, because owning one is a status symbol that demonstrates wealth and power. Mermaids are the most expensive because they're the rarest and because there's a sexual fetishization component that drives up demand. The celestial dragons aren't just buying slaves for labor, they're buying them as trophies, as proof of dominance, as living demonstrations that they can own anything, even sentient beings from species that are normally beyond human reach. It's colonialism distilled into a product catalogue. And here's the horrifying math. If a single mermaid sells for 500 million berries, and if the auction house operates even just once a week, and if even just a few high-value species are sold per auction, we're talking about billions of berries flowing through this market annually. Billions. That money goes to the auction house operators who pay the kidnappers, who use that money to fund their pirate crews, which creates demand for weapons and ships and supplies, which feeds into Doflamingo's broader network. The slave trade isn't just morally reprehensible, it's economically central. It's one of the largest markets in the underworld, and it never stopped. Luffy disrupted one auction, he saved Kami, but the system absorbed that disruption and kept operating. Because as long as the celestial dragons have money and want slaves, someone will provide them. That's the market, that's the demand curve, and the only way to stop it is to eliminate either the buyers or their ability to pay. So when people celebrate the Sabaody arc as Luffy standing up to the celestial dragons, they're not wrong, but they're not seeing the full picture. Luffy punched one celestial dragon, he stopped one sale, he freed one person. The auction house reopened 2 years later. The celestial dragons are still buying, the kidnapping crews are still hunting, and the government is still facilitating it through agents like Stussy who control the infrastructure. The slave trade in One Piece isn't a problem that got solved. It's an ongoing atrocity that operates openly because the people with the power to stop it are the same people profiting from it. And that's why Doflamingo's fall mattered economically. Not because he was running the slave trade uniquely, but because his involvement made the government's complicity undeniable, and when he went down, they had to scramble to maintain the system without him. But they did maintain it, because slavery is too profitable to abandon. So we've covered artificial life through sad weapons from Kaido and human trafficking through the auction house. But there's one more commodity that flows through the underworld that nobody talks about enough, and it's the one that reveals the government's actual endgame: performance enhancement, biological augmentation, genetic manipulation. The world government is in an arms race to create superhuman soldiers, and they're losing. They're losing to the natural advantages of races like giants, Lunarians and fishmen. They're losing to devil fruits they can't control. They're losing to Haki users who surpass their training programs. So they're trying to cheat. They're trying to develop drugs and technologies that can artificially boost human capabilities to compete with naturally superior beings. And the underworld is where they test these technologies. The criminals are the beta testers. And when the experiments succeed, the government takes the results and integrates them into their military programs. When the experiments fail, people like Hody Jones happen. Chapter 6. 47. Fishman Island Arc. Hody Jones reveals his secret weapon, energy steroids. They're pills that drastically increase the user's physical strength. 1 pill doubles your power. 2 pills quadruple it. The effect is exponential and immediate. Chapter 6. 48. Hody takes multiple energy steroids during his fight with Luffy and transforms from a relatively normal-looking fishman into a hulking, monstrous version of himself with white hair and grotesquely enlarged muscles. And the power boost is real. Hody goes from being someone Luffy could defeat casually to someone who requires gear second to handle. That's significant. That's performance enhancement on a scale that changes combat dynamics entirely. And here's the critical detail. The energy steroids aren't Hody's invention. They're ancient. They're from the Ryugu Palace. Chapter 6. 47. We learn that the steroids have been stored in the palace for years, possibly decades, and that they were known to be dangerous, which is why they were locked away. But Hody stole them, and he's been using them, and he's been distributing them to his crew. Chapter 6. 47. The new fishmen, pirates, are all using energy steroids to boost their strength. They're chemically enhanced soldiers fighting against the Straw Hats, and the side effects become obvious as the arc progresses. Chapter 6. 50. After the battle ends, after Hody is defeated, we see what happens to people who abuse energy steroids. They age rapidly, their bodies deteriorate. Hody, who was maybe in his 30s, looks like he's in his 80s by the end of the arc. His hair is completely white. His body is shriveled. His lifespan has been drastically shortened. The energy steroids gave him temporary power at the cost of permanent physical damage. They're not sustainable. They're a loan against your future health that comes due immediately with catastrophic interest. Now here's the question nobody asks. Where did the energy steroids come from originally? Why were they in Ryugu Palace? Who made them? And the answer, implied but never stated explicitly, is that they're connected to the same bioenhancement research the world government has been funding for decades. Think about the timeline. The energy steroids are ancient, stored in a palace that predates the current generation of fishmen. That means they're at least a generation old, probably older. And Fishman Island has historical connections to the surface world, to Joy Boy's promise, to the ancient kingdom, which means the technology to create performance-enhancing drugs existed in the distant past and has been rediscovered or reverse-engineered in the modern era. The energy steroids aren't a new invention. They're ancient technology that was preserved and is now being exploited. And here's where it connects to Caesar Clown and the government's gigantification research. Chapter 6. 75. Punk Hazard. We see Caesar experimenting on children with drugs that stimulate growth. The children are getting larger, they're experiencing rapid physical changes, and Caesar explicitly states that this research is connected to the government's goal of creating giant soldiers. Chapter 6. 98. We learn that Vegapunk was researching gigantification before he deemed it too dangerous and abandoned it. But the research didn't stop. Caesar continued it. And the methodology is the same as the energy steroids. Artificially stimulate the body's growth and strength through chemical intervention. Accept the side effects as inevitable and optimize for short-term power boost over long-term health. Let me make the connection explicit. Energy steroids boost fishman strength exponentially, but cause rapid aging and physical deterioration. Caesar's gigantification drugs make children grow larger, but create dependency and health complications. Both are performance enhancement technologies that sacrifice the user's long-term well-being for immediate power. And both are connected to research that the world government wants. The government isn't trying to create healthy, sustainable enhancement. They're trying to create disposable super soldiers. People who can be chemically boosted for a battle or a mission and then discarded when the side effects become unmanageable. It's weapons-grade biology. It's treating human bodies as ammunition. And we can trace this directly to the Pacifista program. Chapter 4. 85. Sabaody, the Pacifistas are revealed. They're cyborg weapons modelled after Bartholomew Kuma, created by Vegapunk for the world government. They're mass-produced soldiers with laser weapons and incredible durability. Chapter 597, post-time skip. We learn the Pacifistas have been upgraded and improved. And Chapter 1. 1070, Egghead. We see the Seraphim, which are the next generation. Cyborg children with Lunarian Diaz and Devil Fruit powers. The progression is clear. The government has been trying to artificially create superhuman soldiers for years. First through chemical enhancement like the energy steroids and gigantification drugs. Then through cybernetic augmentation like the Pacifistas. And now through genetic engineering and cloning like the Seraphim. But here's the economic angle. All of this research is expensive. Creating Pacifistas requires resources, facilities, test subjects, funding. And where does that funding come from? Chapter 6. 90. We learn that Caesar Clown is being paid for his research. Not by legitimate government budget allocations, but through black market channels. Through the same underworld networks that Doflamingo used to move money. Which means the performance enhancement research is being funded by the slave trade, the weapons trade, the smile trade. The government is using underworld profits to bankroll their arms race. They're taking money from selling slaves and buying weapons from Kaido, and using it to fund experiments that turn children into giants and create cyborg child soldiers. It's a closed loop. The atrocities fund the research. The research produces new capabilities. The new capabilities make the government stronger. The stronger government can extract more wealth from the world. The extracted wealth funds more atrocities. And the criminals in the underworld benefit from this because they get access to the failed experiments. The technologies that don't meet government standards get leaked into the black market. Chapter 6. 47. The energy steroids probably entered circulation because they were deemed too dangerous for official use, but someone saw profit potential and started distributing them to people who were desperate enough to accept the side effects. Hody Jones isn't using cutting-edge government tech. He's using discarded prototypes. He's using the beta version that failed quality control. And it still made him powerful enough to threaten Fishman Island's entire power structure. Which means the successful versions, the technologies that pass government testing, are even more potent, are even more dangerous. Now think about what this means for the Marines. Think about the rank-and-file soldiers who are being told they're fighting for justice while their commanders are developing technologies to turn people into disposable weapons. Chapter 6. 98. The Marines stationed at Punk Hazard didn't know about the child experimentation. They were kept in the dark. They thought it was a legitimate research facility, which means the government compartmentalizes information to prevent moral objections from disrupting operations. The people doing the fighting don't know what the people at the top are funding. And when they find out, like Smoker did in Punk Hazard, when they see children being experimented on and try to intervene, they get stonewalled by bureaucracy and told to follow orders. So here's the synthesis. The world government is in a biological arms race they're losing. They can't compete with giants naturally, they can't compete with Lunarians, they can't compete with advanced devil fruit users. So they're trying to artificially create enhanced soldiers through chemical stimulation, cybernetic augmentation, and genetic engineering. They're funding this research through underworld profits generated by slavery and weapons sales. The technologies that fail quality control get leaked into the black market where criminals like Hody Jones use them. The technologies that succeed get integrated into programs like the Pacifistas and Seraphim, and the cycle continues. The government gets stronger, the underworld gets access to dangerous tools, and the people caught in the middle, the test subjects and the failed experiments and the users who don't understand the side effects, they pay the cost. They're the externality. They're the price of progress in an economy where human life is just another commodity to be optimized and discarded. Energy steroids aren't a Fishman Island specific problem. They're evidence of a global industry in performance enhancement that treats bodies as disposable resources. And every pill Hody took, every transformation he underwent, every year of life he lost to rapid aging is proof that the government's research works. It's just that the cost is too high for official use. So they let it leak to the underworld, and they watch what happens, and they learn from the failures, and they keep experimenting. So we've covered the physical commodities, the artificial devil fruits that require child experimentation, the weapons manufactured by enslaved populations, the human beings sold at auction to celestial dragons, the performance enhancement drugs that destroy users' bodies. All of these are tangible products that move through the underworld economy with price tags and supply chains and measurable value. But there's one commodity that's more valuable than all of them combined, and it doesn't have physical form, information, specifically the ability to control what people believe is true. And there's one person who has monopolized this commodity so completely that he can make or break empires with a single newspaper article. Big News Morgans, the president of the World Economic Journal, an underworld emperor who doesn't sell weapons or slaves or drugs. He sells reality, and he's more powerful than any of them because information determines the value of everything else. Chapter 8. 60. Whole Cake Island, Big Mum's Tea Party. We meet Morgans for the first time. He's an Albatross Zoan user who dresses flamboyantly and speaks in excited, sensationalist language. He's obsessed with news, with scoops, with stories that will sell papers. And he's introduced as one of the 6 emperors of the underworld alongside Stussy, Dufeld, Umit, Giberson, and Drug Peklo. But unlike the others who control physical industries, pleasure districts, finance, shipping, warehousing, undertaking, Morgans controls information. He controls what gets reported, what gets emphasized, what gets buried, and most importantly, he controls the framing. He decides whether an event is presented as a triumph or a disaster, whether a person is a hero or a villain, whether a government action is justified or tyrannical. That's not journalism, that's reality construction, and the entire world reads his paper. Now let me give you the most blatant example of Morgans exercising this power. Chapter 9. 03. After the events of Whole Cake Island, Morgans publishes a story about Luffy, and the headline doesn't say Straw Hat Luffy invades Yonko territory and escapes. It says the 5th Emperor has emerged. 5th Emperor? That's not a report. That's a declaration. That's Morgans unilaterally deciding that Luffy is now on the same tier as Big Mum, Kaido, Shanks and Blackbeard. And he doesn't ask permission. He doesn't verify with the world government or the Marines. He just prints it. And what happens? Luffy's bounty jumps to 1.5 billion berries. Chapter 9. 03. The government didn't decide that number. They reacted to Morgans' article. They had to raise Luffy's bounty to match the narrative Morgans created or risk looking like they weren't taking the threat seriously. Morgans forced the government's hand by controlling the story. Think about what this means economically. Bounties aren't just prices on heads, they're market signals. They communicate to bounty hunters, to pirates, to civilians, how dangerous the government considers a person to be. A high bounty attracts more hunters, more attention, more resources dedicated to capturing that person. But it also increases that person's reputation, makes them more feared, makes potential allies and subordinates more likely to join them because association with a high bounty pirate confers status. So by declaring Luffy the 5th Emperor, Morgans didn't just report on Luffy's rising power. He created it. He made Luffy more important by saying he was important, and the government had to respond to that manufactured importance. That's not reporting news, that's making news, that's market manipulation, and Morgans knows he's doing this. Chapter 9. 03. After publishing the 5th Emperor article, Morgans is shown laughing and celebrating. He's not celebrating because he got a scoop. He's celebrating because he just changed the balance of power in the world by writing words on paper. He's celebrating because he wielded his power, and it worked. And here's the critical detail. Morgans answers to no one. He's not employed by the world government. He's not beholden to any emperor. He's an independent operator who publishes what he wants when he wants. And the only reason he gets away with this is because everyone needs him. The government needs him to control the public narrative. The emperors need him to communicate their strength. The revolutionary army needs him to spread their message. Everyone is dependent on Morgan's publishing their version of events. So everyone has to negotiate with him, has to bargain for favourable coverage, has to accept that Morgan's ultimately decides what the world believes. Now let's jump to chapter 956, the Reverie Aftermath. This is where Morgan's power becomes undeniable. The Gorosei, the 5 highest-ranking world government officials besides Imu, contact Morgan's directly, not through intermediaries, not through official channels. The Gorosei themselves call him, and they give him an order. They tell him to suppress certain information about what happened at the Reverie. They tell him not to publish the truth about Cobra's death, about Sabo's actions, about the chaos that unfolded. They tell him to spin the story in the government's favour, and Morgan's refuses. Chapter 9. 56, page 16. Morgan's tells the Gorosei that he answers to no one, that he publishes the truth as he sees it, that censoring the news would betray his journalistic integrity, and then he hangs up on them. He hangs up on the Gorosei, the 5 most powerful people in the official world government structure, and there's nothing they can do about it. Because if they kill Morgan's, they lose control of the World Economic Journal. If they shut down his paper, another publication will emerge to fill the void, and they'll have even less influence over it. If they try to discredit him, he'll publish the story of the government trying to censor him, and it'll make them look tyrannical. They're trapped. They need Morgan's more than Morgan's needs them. And Morgan's knows this. He knows that information is the only commodity that becomes more valuable the more you try to suppress it. Weapons lose value when confiscated. Slaves lose value when freed. But information that the government doesn't want published becomes infinitely more valuable because the suppression itself proves the information is dangerous. Morgan's has weaponized the Streisand effect. He's made himself untouchable by making truth-telling his brand. And here's where it gets even better. Chapter 1. 1074, Egghead. Morgan's is choosing which photo of Luffy to publish after his Gear 5 awakening. He has multiple options. He could publish a photo that makes Luffy look goofy and non-threatening, emphasizing the cartoonish nature of Gear 5. Or he could publish a photo that makes Luffy look powerful and intimidating, and Morgan's chooses the latter. Not because it's more accurate, but because it sells better, because a threatening 5th Emperor generates more newspaper sales than a silly-looking pirate. Morgan's isn't just reporting reality. He's curating it for maximum economic impact. He's optimizing for engagement, for circulation numbers, for the narrative that makes people keep buying papers. That's not journalism, that's content creation. That's algorithmic thinking applied to news media. And it's brilliant because it means Morgan's has incentive-aligned himself with chaos. The more unstable the world becomes, the more news there is to report, the more papers he sells. Peace is bad for business. War is profitable. Now let's connect this to the broader underworld economy. Every other underworld emperor we've discussed, Stussy with intelligence and pleasure districts, Doflamingo with finance, Umit with shipping, Gibberson with warehousing, Drug Peklo with undertaking, they all depend on Morgan's to maintain their operations. Because if Morgan's publishes a story exposing their activities, they're done. If he writes an article about Stussy being a CP0 agent, her cover is blown. If he exposes Doflamingo's loan shark operations, debtors might revolt. If he reveals Umit's shipping routes, the Marines can intercept them. Morgan's has leverage over everyone because everyone has secrets they don't want published. And the only reason Morgan's doesn't publish those secrets is because he benefits more from maintaining relationships with these people than from exposing them. He's choosing not to destroy them. That's power. And the economics of this are perfect. Morgan's doesn't need to manufacture products. He doesn't need supply chains or distribution networks for physical goods. He publishes newspapers. Information is infinitely reproducible at near zero marginal cost. Once he writes an article, printing and distributing it costs almost nothing relative to the value of the information. But the information can command massive prices because people will pay for access to reality before their competitors get it. Every government, every emperor, every major organization in one piece has to read Morgan's paper to know what narrative is being pushed, what information is being revealed, what the public is being told to believe. They're paying Morgans to tell them what Morgans is saying about them. That's a perfect business model. You control the product, the distribution, and the framing. You can't be undercut by competitors because nobody else has your sources or your reach. You're a monopoly on consensus reality. So, when I say information is the most valuable commodity in the underworld, I mean it literally. You can buy weapons from someone else if Kaido falls. You can buy slaves from someone else if the auction house closes. You can buy drugs from someone else if Caesar gets captured. But you can't buy alternative truth. You can't create a competing version of reality and have it believed. Morgans has monopolized the truth market. And in an economy where everything else is fungible, where commodities can be replaced and supply chains can be rebuilt, information control is the only truly irreplaceable asset, which is why Morgans is the most powerful of the Underworld Emperors despite not commanding armies or territories. He commands belief, and belief determines the value of everything else. That's the dark economy. That's the 5 commodities that actually run the One Piece world. Artificial life built on child experimentation. Weapons manufactured by enslaved populations and sold to governments that claim to oppose slavery. Human beings trafficked through auction houses that operate openly with government protection. Performance enhancement drugs that destroy users' bodies to produce temporary super soldiers. And information that shapes what people believe is true and therefore what actions they take. Every single one of these commodities exists because someone with power decided the economic benefit outweighed the moral cost. And every single one is interconnected. The slave trade funds the weapons research. The weapons research funds the biological enhancement programs. The enhancement programs provide prototypes that leak into the underworld. And Morgans reports on all of it while choosing what to emphasize and what to bury. It's not a black market separate from the legitimate economy. It's the same economy with different branding. And Doflamingo's fall exposed that. And now everyone's scrambling to rebuild the supply chains he left behind. So, we've spent the last hour examining the commodities that flow through the underworld economy. But commodities don't move themselves. They need infrastructure. They need people who control the physical and financial systems that make trade possible. And in One Piece, that infrastructure is controlled by 6 people who met at Big Mum's tea party in chapter 860. 6 Underworld Emperors who don't fight wars or claim territory or build pirate crews. They control industries. Morgans controls information and we've covered him extensively. But the other 5 control the actual machinery of the economy. Stussy controls intelligence and the pleasure trade. Dufeld controls finance and debt. Umit controls shipping lanes. Giberson controls warehousing. Drug Peklo controls disposal. And together they represent a complete economic ecosystem where every function necessary for large-scale criminal enterprise is monopolized by a single operator. You can't move illegal goods without Umit. You can't store them without Giberson. You can't fund operations without Dufeld. You can't gather intelligence without Stussy. And you can't dispose of evidence without Drug Peklo. They're not criminals. They're the Chamber of Commerce for crime. And they're all more powerful than most pirates will ever be. Let me start with the most fascinating one, because her reveal in Egghead changes everything we thought we knew about the Underworld's relationship with the world government, Stussy. Chapter 8. 60. She's introduced as the Queen of the Pleasure District. That's a euphemism. She controls prostitution, escort services, entertainment establishments that cater to wealthy and powerful clients. Places where secrets are shared, where deals are negotiated, where powerful people let their guard down because they think they're in private. And Stussy owns those places, which means she has access to information that nobody else can get. Blackmail material, compromat, evidence of affairs, of illegal deals, of vices that powerful people want hidden. That's her business model on the surface. But Chapter 1. 1072. Egghead arc, we get the reveal that changes everything. Stussy is a CP0 agent, and not just an agent. She's a clone. She's a clone of Miss Buckingham Stussy, the former mad scientist, created by the same research team that made the Seraphim. Think about what this means. The world government has an embedded operative who's simultaneously an Underworld Emperor and a Cypher Pole agent. Stussy isn't infiltrating the underworld. She is the underworld. Or at least, she represents a significant portion of it. Every pleasure district she controls, every establishment under her management is a government surveillance operation. Every client who visits one of her venues is being monitored. Every conversation that happens in one of her establishments is being recorded or reported. The pleasure district economy isn't separate from government intelligence gathering. It's integrated. The government is running the brothels. They're running the escort services. They're running the entertainment venues where criminals and nobles and pirates relax and talk freely. And Stussy is collecting all of it and reporting back to CP0. But here's where it gets even more insidious. Stussy isn't just collecting intelligence passively. Chapter 1. 1073. Egghead. Stussy betrays Lucci and the other CP0 agents. She attacks Lucci to protect Vegapunk and the Straw Hats. She chooses in that moment to side against the world government's official objectives. And the government doesn't immediately disavow her or mark her for execution. Why? Because Stussy is too valuable to lose. Because she's not just an agent. She's infrastructure. If the government kills Stussy, they lose control of the pleasure district economy. They lose access to all the intelligence that flows through those establishments. They lose their embedded presence in the Underworld Emperors network. So they have to negotiate with her. They have to accept that she's gone rogue, at least temporarily, because replacing her would cost more than managing her disloyalty. And the clone aspect adds another layer. Chapter 1. 1072. We learn that Stussy is a clone of Miss Buckingham Stussy, who was part of Mads alongside Vegapunk, Caesar, Queen and Judge. Mads was the illegal research group that was studying advanced genetics and biological engineering before the government shut them down and absorbed their research. Which means the government has been sitting on cloning technology for years, and they used it to create Stussy, which raises the question, how many other Stussys are there? If you can clone one person and insert them into the underworld as an operative, why not clone multiple people? Why not create an entire network of identical agents who can operate in different locations while appearing to be different individuals? The Seraphim prove the government is mass-producing clones now. Stussy proves they've been doing it for years, which means the underworld might be filled with government clones and nobody knows it. Let's think about this economically. The pleasure district industry is enormous. Chapter 8. 60. Stussy is treated as an equal by the other Underworld Emperors, which means her economic power is on par with people who control shipping lanes and financial systems. That means the pleasure district generates billions of berries annually, and all of that money is flowing through establishments that are, unknowingly to the clients, government surveillance operations. The government is profiting from prostitution while simultaneously gathering intelligence from it. They're double dipping. They're getting paid to spy on people, and the clients don't know they're being monitored because they think Stussy is just a criminal, just an underworld figure who operates outside government control. The cover is perfect, and it's been operational for years. Now, here's the power dynamic this creates. Stussy has blackmail material on everyone. Every noble who visits her establishments, every pirate who uses her services, every merchant who negotiates deals in her venues. She knows their secrets. She knows their vices. She knows what they're willing to pay for and what they're desperate to hide. And because she's CP0, she can use that information to manipulate them on behalf of the government. She can threaten to expose someone's affair unless they vote a certain way at the reverie. She can leverage someone's illegal deal to force them to provide intelligence. She can blackmail people into becoming government assets without them even knowing they're being blackmailed. It's not coercion at gunpoint. It's soft power. It's using information as currency to purchase loyalty or compliance or silence. And Stussy's position as an Underworld Emperor means she has access to the other 5. She attends meetings with Morgans, Dufeld, Umit, Guyberson, and Drug Petclo. She hears their plans. She knows their operations. She can report all of it back to the government, which means the government has visibility into the entire underworld's top-level decision-making. They know what shipping routes are being used. They know what financial deals are being negotiated. They know what information is being suppressed or amplified by Morgans. They know everything. And they let it continue because controlling the underworld is more valuable than destroying it. You don't shut down criminal infrastructure if you can co-opt it. You embed agents. You take it over from the inside. And that's what Stussy represents. The government doesn't fight the underworld. They are the underworld. But Chapter 1. 1073 complicates this because Stussy betrays Lucci. She chooses to protect Vegapunk and the Straw Hats over following her orders. Which means either she's developed genuine loyalty to Vegapunk, who created her, or she's operating on deeper orders that Lucci doesn't know about. Maybe the government has factions and Stussy answers to one faction while Lucci answers to another. Maybe Stussy's been given autonomy to make judgment calls that contradict official policy if she thinks it serves long-term government interests. Or maybe she's genuinely gone rogue and the government is about to lose control of the most valuable intelligence asset they've ever created. We don't know yet. But what we do know is that Stussy's existence proves the government has been playing a much deeper game than anyone realised. They're not just fighting the underworld. They've been running significant portions of it for years through embedded clones who pretend to be criminals. So when people talk about the Underworld Emperors as independent criminal operators, they're wrong about Stussy. She's not independent. She never was. She's a government plant. And if she's a plant, how many others are? Is Dufeld a government asset? Is Umit? Is Guyberson? We don't have evidence for those yet. But Stussy's reveal means we have to question every single underworld figure's loyalties. Because if the government successfully embedded one clone into the highest levels of the criminal economy, they've probably done it elsewhere. And that means the entire underworld might be a government-controlled operation disguised as crime, which would explain why the government tolerates so much illegal activity. Because they're not tolerating it, they're managing it, they're running it, and they're profiting from it while maintaining the appearance of opposition. That's Stussy. That's the Queen of the Pleasure District, not a criminal. A government operative with a monopoly on secrets. Cloned from a scientist. Embedded in the underworld's highest levels, reporting everything back to Cypher Pol while maintaining perfect cover for years. She's not part of the dark economy. She's proof that the dark economy is a government operation. So Stussy controls intelligence and the government controls Stussy, which means the government has visibility into everyone's secrets. But intelligence only matters if you can act on it. And action requires resources. Resources require money. And in the underworld, there's only one person who controls access to large-scale financing, Dufeld, the god of fortune, the loan shark who funds emperors and revolutionaries and kingdoms and criminal enterprises without caring who wins because he gets paid either way. Dufeld doesn't pick sides, he picks clients. And his client list includes people who are actively trying to kill each other. Which means Dufeld has created a system where war is always profitable for him because both sides of every conflict are in debt to the same creditor. He's not too big to fail. He's too essential to oppose. Because if you refuse to do business with Dufeld, your enemies will, and they'll use his money to destroy you. Chapter 8. 60 Whole Cake Island. Dufeld is introduced at Big Mum's tea party, and his title isn't subtle. God of Fortune, not wealthy businessman, not financier, God of Fortune. That's not a metaphor, that's a statement of power. Dufeld believes he controls fortune itself. He decides who gets access to capital and who doesn't. He decides which operations get funded and which starve. He decides, through his lending decisions, which factions rise and which fall, and the other Underworld Emperors treat him with deference. Even Big Mum, one of the 4 emperors who commands massive territory and a powerful crew, invited Dufeld to her tea party as a guest of honour. Not as a subordinate, as an equal, which means Big Mum needed something from Dufeld. And what would an emperor need from a loan shark? Money, credit, access to capital for operations that her own treasury couldn't cover. Now, people think the Yonko are self-sufficient. They think emperors with massive territories and tribute-paying nations don't need to borrow money. But that's wrong. Running an empire is expensive. Chapter 8. 58 through 860. We see the scale of Big Mum's territory. Dozens of islands, thousands of subordinates, multiple armies, the Vinsmoke Alliance negotiations, the construction of the wedding venue, the catering for hundreds of guests. All of this costs money, enormous amounts of money, and while Big Mum collects tribute from her territories, she also spends money maintaining her military, funding her intelligence operations, bribing officials, purchasing weapons, and throwing elaborate parties that serve diplomatic purposes. Sometimes expenses exceed revenue. Sometimes she needs to make a move that requires more liquid capital than she has available, and that's when you go to Doflamingo. And here's the beautiful part of Doflamingo's business model. He doesn't care if you're a pirate or a revolutionary or a kingdom or a criminal organization. He cares if you can pay him back with interest. Chapter 8:60. Doflamingo's presence at Big Mum's tea party suggests he's been doing business with her for years. He's probably financed some of her territorial expansions, some of her wars, some of her major operations, and Big Mum has paid him back, probably with interest, which is why he keeps lending to her. But Doflamingo doesn't exclusively lend to Big Mum, he lends to everyone, which means he's probably also financed operations for Kaido, for various kingdoms, for criminal organizations, potentially even for the Revolutionary Army if they needed capital for a major action. Doflamingo is funding all sides simultaneously, and that's not a conflict of interest, that's diversification, that's perfect risk management. Think about the economics of this. If you're a loan shark and you only lend to one faction, you're vulnerable. If that faction loses a war, they can't pay you back, and you lose everything. But if you lend to multiple factions who are fighting each other, you guarantee that at least some of your clients will survive and pay you back. Even better, you can structure the loans so that the winners have to use their victory spoils to pay off their debts, which means you profit from their success. And the losers, if they survive, they owe you even more because they lost and need another loan to rebuild. Doflamingo has created a system where war is a profit center. Every conflict generates demand for his services. Both sides need money to fight. Both sides come to him. He funds both sides. One side wins, pays him back with interest plus a bonus for the victory. The other side loses, still owes him money, and needs another loan to recover. He wins regardless of the outcome. And here's where it gets even more insidious. Debt is control. Chapter 8:60. Doflamingo's title isn't just about wealth, it's about power. If Big Mum owes Doflamingo money, then Doflamingo has leverage over Big Mum. Not physical leverage, he's not strong enough to fight her, but financial leverage. If Big Mum defaults on a loan, Doflamingo can make it known to the Underworld that she doesn't honour her debts. That destroys her credit, makes it impossible for her to borrow in the future, makes other Underworld figures wary of doing business with her. Her reputation for reliability gets destroyed. And reputation is everything in the Underworld economy. If people don't trust you to honour deals, you can't operate. So even an emperor like Big Mum has to pay Doflamingo back, even if it's inconvenient, even if it strains her resources, because defaulting would cost her more in lost reputation than the debt itself costs in interest. Now multiply this dynamic across every major faction in the world. If Doflamingo is lending to the Yonko, and if he's also lending to kingdoms, and if he's also lending to revolutionary cells, and if he's also lending to pirate crews, then Doflamingo has financial leverage over everyone. He knows who's in debt. He knows who's struggling to make payments. He knows who's overextended and vulnerable. That's intelligence. That's the same type of information Stussy collects through blackmail, except Doflamingo collects it through balance sheets. Financial records don't lie. If someone takes out a massive loan, they're planning something big. If someone starts missing payments, they're in trouble. If someone suddenly pays off all their debts, they just came into money from somewhere. Doflamingo can read the economy like a book because he's holding everyone's ledger. And here's the critical question. Who does Doflamingo report to? Is he independent? Or is he, like Stussy, secretly working for someone else. We don't have evidence that Doflamingo is a government agent, but we also don't have evidence that he's not. What we know is that Doflamingo has been operating openly for years without the government shutting him down, which means either the government can't shut him down because he's too well protected, or they won't shut him down because he's useful to them. And given what we learnt about Stussy, given that the government has embedded operatives in the highest levels of the underworld, it's entirely possible that Doflamingo is feeding financial intelligence to the government, that every loan he makes, every debt he tracks, every payment he receives is being reported to Cypher Pol so they can map the financial flows of the entire criminal economy. But even if Doflamingo isn't a government agent, he's still effectively serving government interests. Because debt keeps people predictable. If you owe money, you have to keep earning. You can't just walk away from the system. You have to stay engaged, stay productive, stay profitable, because you have payments to make. Doflamingo's lending practices ensure that major factions can't opt out of the economy. They can't just retire to some island and stop participating. They have debts, they have obligations, they have to keep playing the game because they owe money to the bank. And the bank is Doflamingo. And Doflamingo never forgives debt, never writes it off, never lets anyone walk away clean. The god of fortune demands his tribute, and everyone pays. Let me give you a hypothetical that's almost certainly true based on context. When Kaido was building his weapons factories in Wano, when he was setting up his smile trade with Doflamingo, when he was consolidating his position as an emperor, he needed capital. Enormous amounts of capital. Building infrastructure, recruiting subordinates, purchasing equipment. All of that costs money up front before it generates returns. And where would Kaido get that kind of money? From Doflamingo. Kaido probably borrowed from Doflamingo to fund his initial operations in Wano, and he paid Doflamingo back with profits from the weapons trade and the smile sales, which means Doflamingo profited from Kaido's atrocities. Every weapon Kaido sold, every slave who worked in his factories, every smile fruit that turned someone into a pleasure, a portion of those profits went back to Doflamingo as debt repayment with interest. Doflamingo funded tyranny. And when Luffy defeated Kaido, when Wano was liberated, Doflamingo lost a client, lost a revenue stream. Kaido's debt probably went unpaid, which means Doflamingo either wrote it off as a loss, or he's going to try to collect from Kaido's former subordinates. Either way, Kaido's fall hurt Doflamingo's bottom line, but not catastrophically, because Doflamingo has dozens of other clients, hundreds probably. Kaido was one account among many, and that's the point. Doflamingo is diversified enough that losing one client, even a Yonko, doesn't destroy him. So here's the synthesis. Doflamingo is the god of fortune because he controls access to capital in the underworld economy. He lends to everyone, regardless of their allegiances or ideologies, because lending to all sides of every conflict guarantees he profits no matter who wins. He uses debt as a control mechanism, ensuring that major factions remain engaged in the economy and can't opt out. He collects financial intelligence through lending patterns and payment behaviours, and he may or may not be reporting all of this to the world government, but even if he's independent, his activities serve government interests by keeping the underworld predictable and controllable. You can't have a shadow economy without a shadow bank, and Doflamingo is that bank. He's the Federal Reserve of crime, the IMF of the underworld, and every major player in One Piece, from the Yonko to the Revolutionary Army to various kingdoms, probably owes him money, which means he's more powerful than any of them individually. Because he doesn't need to win fights, he just needs to get paid, and everyone always pays. Because the alternative is worse than death. The alternative is bad credit. So Doflamingo controls the money. He decides who gets funded and who doesn't. But money doesn't move goods. Money doesn't transport weapons from Wano to buyers across the world. Money doesn't smuggle slaves from kidnapping sites to Sabaody. Money doesn't deliver smile fruits from Dressrosa to Kaido's territory. Physical logistics does all of that. And in the One Piece world, where the oceans are divided by the Red Line and the Calm Belts and the Grand Line's chaotic weather, where navigation is deliberately difficult and trade routes are carefully controlled, logistics isn't just important, it's everything, and one person has monopolized it. Umit, The deep ocean current, the shipping king who controls the trade routes that move illegal goods across the world. You can have all the money in the world, you can have the best products, but if you can't transport them, they're worthless. And you can't transport them without Umit, which makes him the invisible hand of the market made literal. He doesn't produce anything, he doesn't fight anyone, he just moves things from point A to point B, and that makes him indispensable. Chapter 8. 60. Whole Cake Island. Umit is introduced at Big Mum's tea party as his title is Shipping King, and his epithet, Deep Ocean Current, is brilliant because it's both literal and metaphorical. Ocean currents move things. They're invisible forces that transport ships and goods across vast distances without anyone seeing the mechanism. You just see the results. Ships arrive, goods get delivered, and you don't think about the current that made it possible. That's Umit. He's the underlying force that makes all trade possible. The current you can't see but everyone depends on. And if you're moving illegal goods, if you're smuggling weapons or slaves or contraband, you need shipping routes that avoid marine patrols, that bypass customs inspections, that don't appear on official manifests. You need Umit's network. Now, here's what makes Umit's monopoly so powerful. The ocean is big, really big. Chapter 1:05. Crocus explains that the Grand Line is massive and navigation is nearly impossible without specialised compasses. The four blues are separated by the calm belts and the red line. Normal trade routes take weeks or months to traverse, and that's for legal goods moving through official channels. For illegal goods, you can't use official channels, you can't dock at major ports, you can't file customs paperwork. You need alternative routes, hidden routes. Routes that only people like Umit know about because they've spent decades mapping the currents, bribing port authorities, identifying blind spots in marine patrol patterns, and establishing networks of corrupt harbour masters who look the other way when your ships arrive. And Umit doesn't just own ships, he owns the knowledge of how to move goods invisibly. Chapter 8. 60. His epithet Deep Ocean Current suggests he understands ocean navigation at a level most people don't. He knows where the currents flow, where the weather patterns are predictable, where the sea kings don't gather, where the marines don't patrol. That knowledge is proprietary. It's not written down in any public navigation manual. It's accumulated through years of illegal shipping operations, and Umit guards it jealously because that knowledge is his competitive advantage. If other shipping operations knew his routes, they could compete with him, so he keeps the routes secret. He ensures that if you want to move illegal goods, you have to hire his ships, use his crews, pay his rates. There's no alternative. He's a monopoly. Let's trace how this worked with Doflamingo's operation, because we have context for this. Doflamingo was brokering weapons from Kaido to various buyers. Those weapons were manufactured in Wano. Wano is in the New World, isolated behind waterfalls, difficult to access. The buyers were spread across the world, some in the Four Blues, some in Paradise, some in other parts of the New World. So how did the weapons get from Wano to the buyers? They didn't teleport, they were shipped. And who controlled shipping routes in the Underworld? Umit. So even though Doflamingo was the broker, even though he was the one making the deals and collecting the payments, he needed Umit to actually deliver the product. Doflamingo's entire operation depended on Umit's logistics network. Without Umit's ships, the weapons would have been stuck in Wano. Kaido would have had warehouses full of product he couldn't monetize. The entire supply chain would have collapsed. And this creates a fascinating power dynamic because it means Umit has leverage over everyone, over Kaido, who needed to move weapons, over Doflamingo, who needed to deliver them to buyers, over the buyers, who needed the products to arrive. Everyone in the supply chain was dependent on Umit at some point, which means Umit could, theoretically, shut down any operation by refusing to ship for them. If Umit decided he didn't like Kaido, he could refuse to transport Kaido's weapons. Kaido would be stuck. His manufacturing would be pointless. His revenue would drop to zero. Kaido could threaten Umit, sure, could try to intimidate him into compliance, but Umit doesn't need to be physically present. He just needs to issue orders to his fleet, and his ships operate across the entire world. You can't threaten every ship captain simultaneously. You can't force a global shipping network to obey through violence. So even someone as powerful as Kaido needs Umit more than Umit needs Kaido. Now, why doesn't the world government shut down Umit? Why don't the Marines just arrest him and seize his ships? Because they can't find him. Chapter 8. 60. Umit is at Big Mum's tea party, but that's a rare public appearance. Most of the time, Umit is invisible. He's deep ocean current. You see the effects, but you don't see the person. His ships fly neutral flags or false flags. His captains don't know they're working for Umit specifically. They just know they're part of a network. The organisation is decentralised enough that arresting any individual ship captain doesn't expose the broader operation. And even if the Marines did catch Umit personally, shutting down his network would require arresting hundreds of ship captains, bribing or replacing corrupt port authorities across dozens of islands, and mapping all his secret routes. That's logistically impossible. The Marines don't have the resources, so they let it continue because interdicting every single ship is more expensive than tolerating the smuggling. And here's the beautiful part. Umit probably ships for the world government too. Not officially, not through government contracts, but through back channels. When the government needs to move something sensitive, something they don't want on official manifests, they hire Umit's network. Maybe they're moving weapons to a secret base. Maybe they're relocating prisoners to impel down without public records. Maybe they're transporting celestial dragons who don't want their travel plans known. Umit can do all of that because his ships operate outside official oversight, which means the government has the same dependency on Umit that criminals do. They need him, which makes him untouchable, because if they arrest Umit, they lose their own off-the-books logistics network. Let me give you the scale of this operation by connecting it to what we know. Chapter 9. 29. CP0 is in Wano negotiating weapons purchases. Those weapons need to get from Wano to wherever the government wants them. How? Umit's ships. Chapter 5. 01. Slaves are being transported from kidnapping sites to Sabaody's auction house. How? Umit's ships. Chapter 6. 89 through 699, Sabaody is being moved from Punk Hazard to Dress Rosa. How? Umit's ships. Every illegal commodity we've discussed, weapons, slaves, chemicals, drugs, all of them require shipping. All of them require logistics. And all of them, at some point, probably used Umit's network. He's not tangentially connected to these operations. He's essential to all of them. He's the circulatory system of the underworld economy. Without him, nothing moves. The entire system clots. And Umit's power is increasing post-Doflamingo. Because when Doflamingo fell, when the central broker disappeared, the demand for independent shipping increased. Now everyone needs to arrange their own transport instead of relying on Doflamingo's connections. Which means more people are hiring Umit directly, which means Umit is taking on roles Doflamingo used to fill. He's not just shipping goods anymore, he's coordinating deals. He's connecting buyers to sellers. He's becoming a broker himself because he's the only person with visibility into the entire supply chain. He knows who's shipping what to whom because his ships are carrying it. That's information, that's intelligence, and intelligence is power. So when we talk about the 6 Underworld Emperors, when we rank them by importance, Umit is arguably second only to Morgan's. Because Morgan's controls what people believe, but Umit controls what people can't do. You can't wage war without moving weapons. You can't run a criminal empire without transporting goods. You can't operate across multiple territories without logistics. And Umit is logistics. He's the invisible infrastructure that makes everything else possible. The deep ocean current that moves the world. And you can't see him. You can't catch him. You can't stop him. You can only pay him and hope he keeps moving your goods. Because if Umit decides you're not worth working with, your operation is dead in the water, literally. So we've covered intelligence through Stussy, finance through Dofeld, and shipping through Umit. Those are the obvious power centres, the ones that scream important. But the underworld economy has 2 more emperors, and most people dismiss them because their industries sound boring. Gibberson, the warehouse king, and Drug Peklo, the undertaker, warehousing and body disposal. Not sexy, not dramatic, just logistics and cleanup, except that's exactly wrong. Because warehousing isn't just storage, it's visibility into future operations. If you know what someone's stockpiling, you know what they're planning. And body disposal isn't just cleanup, it's evidence control. If you handle the bodies, you know who killed whom and can erase the proof. Gibbison and Drug Peklo aren't service providers. They're intelligence brokers disguised as boring middlemen. And they know more about what's actually happening in the underworld than anyone except Morgans. Because everyone needs to store things. And everyone needs to dispose of evidence. And both of those needs create information leaks. Let's start with Gibbison, because warehousing is more important than it sounds. Chapter 8. 60. He's introduced as the Concealer, which already tells you he's not just running storage units. He's hiding things, concealing them, making them disappear from public view until they're needed. And what gets warehoused in the underworld? Everything. Weapons waiting to be distributed, stolen goods waiting to be fenced, contraband waiting for prices to rise, slaves waiting to be auctioned, smile fruits waiting for buyers. Every illegal commodity has to be stored somewhere between production and sale. You can't carry a warehouse worth of weapons on your ship. You can't keep slaves in the open where authorities might see them. You need secure storage, hidden locations, places where goods can sit for weeks or months without being discovered. And Gibbison owns those places. Now here's the intelligence angle. When you store something with Gibbison, you're telling him what you have. If Kaido ships 1,000 weapons to one of Gibbison's warehouses, Gibbison knows Kaido has 1,000 weapons ready to move. If Big Mum stores stolen treasure in Gibbison's facilities, Gibbison knows she's sitting on liquid assets. If the Revolutionary Army stashes supplies in his warehouses, Gibbison knows they're planning operations in that region. Every storage transaction is a disclosure. It's telling Gibbison what resources you have, where they're located, and approximately when you'll need them, because you don't store things indefinitely. Storage costs money. You store things for specific timelines, until a deal closes, until a buyer arrives, until you're ready to move them, and those timelines reveal intent, reveal planning, reveal operations before they happen. So Gibbison doesn't just run warehouses, he runs a prediction market for criminal activity. He can see, weeks in advance, when someone's planning a major move. If a pirate crew suddenly rents massive storage space, they're about to acquire something big. If a kingdom starts warehousing food and medical supplies in Gibbison's facilities near a border, they're preparing for war or expecting refugees. If weapons stockpiles start appearing in warehouses near a specific island, someone's planning an invasion. Gibbison can read the underworld's future through storage patterns, and that information is valuable. Morgans would pay for it to get ahead of stories. Stussy would pay for it to feed to CP0. Dufeld would pay for it to inform his lending decisions. Gibbison can sell the same information multiple times to different buyers because everyone wants to know what's coming before it happens. And here's the power dynamic this creates. Gibbison knows where everyone's vulnerabilities are because he knows where everyone's stockpiles are. If you're storing weapons in his warehouse and someone attacks that warehouse, you lose your entire arsenal. If you're storing treasure and Gibbison tells someone where it is, you lose your funding. Gibbison has leverage because he controls the physical location of everyone's reserves. He could theoretically sell out any of his clients by revealing storage locations to their enemies. He doesn't do this, presumably, because it would destroy his reputation and nobody would ever use his services again. But the fact that he could means everyone who uses his warehouses is trusting him with their operational security. And that trust is a form of power. People don't trust you unless they need you more than they fear you. Now, let's talk about Drug Peklo, because his role is even more sinister once you understand it. Chapter 8. 60. He's introduced as Major Undertaker. He's described as the king of the funeral and burial industry. And on the surface, that sounds innocuous. People die. Someone has to handle the bodies. Someone has to run funerals. But Drug Peklo doesn't just handle natural deaths. He handles unnatural deaths. He handles bodies that people don't want found. He handles evidence. When a pirate crew murders someone and needs the body to disappear, they call drug peklo. When a kingdom assassinates a rival noble and needs plausible deniability, they call drug peklo. When the underworld has a cleanup problem, drug peklo solves it. And in doing so, he accumulates information about who's killing whom. Think about what this means from an intelligence perspective. Every body that goes through drug peklo's operation tells a story, the cause of death, the timing, the location where the body was found, who requested the disposal, who paid for it. If you're tracking this information across hundreds or thousands of bodies, you can map violence patterns. You can see which organizations are most active, which territories are contested, which figures are being targeted. You can identify assassination campaigns before they're publicly known. You can see gang wars forming before they escalate. Drug Peklo has a database of death that reveals the underworld's conflicts in real time, and just like Gibbison, he can sell that information. Can tell people, your rival just disposed of 3 bodies this week, all from your territory. They're making moves against you. And there's another layer, evidence control. When Drug Peklo disposes of a body, he erases evidence of murder. He makes it impossible for authorities to investigate. Chapter 8. 60, his title, Major Undertaker, suggests he handles major operations, not just individual deaths, mass graves, disaster cleanup, situations where dozens or hundreds of bodies need to disappear quickly. That's not funeral services, that's industrial-scale evidence destruction. And the world government probably uses him. When they conduct buster calls that kill entire island populations, someone has to handle the bodies afterward. When they execute political prisoners, someone has to dispose of them quietly. When CP0 assassinates targets, someone has to make the corpses vanish. Drug Peklo does that. He's the government's janitor. He cleans up their messes so there's no forensic evidence left behind. But here's where it gets interesting. Drug Peklo has leverage over his clients, just like Gibbison does. Because Drug Peklo keeps records. He has to. You can't run a disposal operation without tracking what you've disposed of, where, when, for whom. And those records are blackmail material. If Drug Peklo decides to expose someone, he can produce bodies. He can provide him evidence of murders that his clients thought were erased. He can connect kills to killers. He can destroy reputations and end careers and get people arrested or executed. So everyone who uses Drug Peklo's services is trusting him not to betray them. And that trust, again, is power. Drug Peklo is one murder confession away from toppling empires, and everyone knows it. So they pay him well, they treat him with respect, they don't cross him, because crossing Drug Peklo means he might start exhuming graves. Now let's connect both of them to the broader underworld structure. Gibbison and Drug Peklo are at the endpoints of every criminal operation. Gibbison handles storage at the beginning, when goods are waiting to be distributed. Drug Peklo handles disposal at the end, when operations go wrong and people die. Together, they bracket the entire life cycle of criminal activity, and both of them are collecting intelligence throughout. Gibbison knows what's coming. Drug Peklo knows what went wrong. If you combine their information, you'd have a complete picture of the underworld's operations. What's being planned, what succeeded, what failed, who's rising, who's dying. That's why they're Underworld Emperors, despite not having armies or devil fruits or combat power. They don't need strength. They have knowledge. And knowledge of the right kind, at the right time, is more valuable than any weapon. And here's the final synthesis. All 6 Underworld Emperors control information in different forms. Morgans controls narrative, what people believe is true. Stussy controls secrets, what people don't want revealed. Dufeld controls financial data, who owes what to whom. Umit controls logistics data, what's moving and where. Gibbison controls inventory data, what's being stored and why. Drug Peklo controls death data, who's killing whom and how. Together, they have complete visibility into the underworld economy. They know what's happening before it happens, while it's happening, and after it happens. They're not competing with each other. They're complementary. They're pieces of a surveillance apparatus that monitors the entire criminal world. And the beautiful irony, most of the criminals being surveilled don't realise it. They think they're just hiring service providers. They don't understand they're generating intelligence with every transaction. So when people wonder why the world government doesn't shut down the underworld, this is why. Because the underworld is how the government watches everyone. Stussy reports directly to CP0. Doflamingo probably feeds financial intelligence to someone. Umit's shipping manifests reveal smuggling patterns. Gibson's warehouse records show operational planning. Drug Peclo's disposal logs document violence. And Morgan's publishes narratives that shape public opinion. The underworld isn't opposition to government power. It's an extension of it. It's the panopticon. It's surveillance capitalism before that term existed. And Gibson and Drug Peclo are the least obvious but most insidious parts of it, because nobody thinks warehousing and funerals are dangerous. They just think they're boring. And that's exactly what makes them effective. So we've examined all 6 Underworld Emperors individually. Morgan's controls narrative. Stussy controls secrets. Doflamingo controls finance. Umit controls logistics. Gibson controls inventory. Drug Peclo controls death records. But the real genius isn't that these 6 people exist. It's that they work together as a system. As a complete economic infrastructure where every function necessary for large-scale criminal enterprise is monopolized and integrated. They're not competitors. They're components. They're the organs of a body. And that body is the underworld economy itself. And the moment we see them all together, the moment Oda shows us the 6 emperors in one room at Big Mum's tea party in chapter 860, he's not just introducing characters, he's showing us the board of directors, the people who actually run the world beneath the world. And what's fascinating is that Big Mum invited them. She didn't summon them. She invited them as guests, as equals, which means even a Yonko recognizes she needs these people more than they need her. Let's examine the tea party itself, because everything about it reveals the power dynamic. Chapter 8. 58 through 8. 60. Big Mum is preparing for a massive event, a wedding between her daughter Pudding and Sanji, designed to secure an alliance with the Vinsmoke family and their cloning technology. Hundreds of guests are invited. The entire operation is elaborate, expensive, and politically significant. And among the guests are the 6 Underworld Emperors, not as subordinates, not as servants, as VIPs. They're seated in prominent positions, they're treated with deference, and Big Mum is personally ensuring they're satisfied. Why? Because Big Mum needs them. She needs Morgan's to report the wedding favourably so her reputation as a powerful broker grows. She needs Doflamingo's continued financial support for her operations. She needs Umit's shipping network to move her goods. She needs Gibson's warehouses to store her reserves. She needs Drug Peclo to handle her messes. And she needs Stussy's intelligence network to know what her rivals are doing. In other words, the tea party isn't a social event, it's a business summit. Big Mum is consolidating her position in the underworld by demonstrating that she has relationships with all 6 key infrastructure providers. She's showing other factions that if they want to challenge her, they'll have to fight not just her military forces but also the economic system that supports her. She's making alliances visible to create deterrence, and the 6 emperors are participating because it benefits them too. Being seen at Big Mum's tea party, being treated as honoured guests by a Yonko, reinforces their status. It advertises that even the most powerful pirates in the world recognise their importance. It's mutual advertising. Big Mum gets credibility from associating with them. They get credibility from associating with her. Everyone wins. Except the assassination attempt happens. Chapter 8. 63 through 867. Beej tries to kill Big Mum during the wedding. Chaos erupts. The plan fails. Big Mum survives. And here's what's important. The 6 Underworld Emperors also survive. Not because they're fighters, most of them aren't particularly strong in combat, but because they're too valuable to kill. When the chaos starts, when gunfire breaks out and people are panicking, nobody targets the Underworld Emperors. Not Beej's crew, not Big Mum's forces, not even Luffy, who's crashing the party. Because everyone, even in the middle of an assassination attempt, understands that killing these 6 people would destabilize the entire economy. You don't kill your banker in the middle of a heist. You don't destroy your shipping network while you're trying to escape. You don't murder the Undertaker while there are bodies piling up. The Six Emperors survive every major conflict not because they're unkillable, but because they're unkillable. Killing them creates more problems than it solves. And this reveals something crucial about power in One Piece. Power isn't just about strength, it's about being systemically important. Kaido was incredibly strong. Big Mom was incredibly strong. Both are defeated by the end of Wano. But the 6 Underworld Emperors, they're still operating, still conducting business, still controlling their industries. Because you can defeat a person. You can't defeat infrastructure. You can beat Big Mom in a fight, but you can't beat the concept of shipping lanes in a fight. You can imprison Kaido, but you can't imprison the concept of warehousing. The Underworld Emperors have transcended individual vulnerability by becoming functions, by becoming necessary components of the system. And systems are much harder to destroy than people. Now let's talk about how these 6 work together synergistically, because this is where the real power emerges. Imagine you're a mid-level criminal organization. You want to smuggle weapons from one sea to another. Here's what you need. First, you need money to buy the weapons. You go to Doflamingo. He assesses your credit and lends you capital. Second, you need the weapons themselves, which means you need to buy from someone like Kaido or access weapons through Doflamingo's old network. Third, you need to store the weapons somewhere secure while you arrange the sale. You rent space from Gibbison. Fourth, you need to transport the weapons to the buyer. You hire Umit's shipping network. Fifth, if anything goes wrong, if people die during the transaction, you need Drug Peklo to dispose of the bodies. And finally, you need Morgans not to report on your operation, which means you either pay him to suppress the story or you accept that if he reports it, you become famous and your bounty goes up, which might actually help your reputation if you're trying to attract recruits. See how that works? Every step of your criminal operation requires at least one of the 6 emperors. You can't operate without them. And they all know about your operation because you're using their services. Stussy probably knows because you negotiated the deal in one of her pleasure district establishments. Doflamingo knows because he's tracking your debt. Umit knows because his ships are moving your product. Gibbison knows because you stored the weapons in his warehouse. Drug Peklo knows because you called him when things went wrong. Morgans knows because he has sources in all of these places. The 6 emperors have created a system where criminality is impossible without them, and participating in criminality means disclosing your operations to them. It's perfect. It's a surveillance economy disguised as a service economy, and everyone participates because the alternative is not operating at all. And this is why Doflamingo's fall mattered so much. Because Doflamingo wasn't one of the 6 emperors, but he was their best customer. He used all of their services more than anyone else. He borrowed from Doflamingo to fund operations. He shipped with Umit constantly. He stored goods with Gibbison. He needed Drug Peklo to clean up messes. He coordinated with Morgans to control narratives. And he probably dealt with Stussy for intelligence. Doflamingo was the nexus, the super user, the client who generated the most revenue for all 6 of them. And when he fell, when Luffy defeated him, the 6 emperors didn't just lose one client. They lost the client who connected everyone else. Doflamingo was the hub that made the whole network efficient. Without him, people have to negotiate with the 6 emperors individually, have to arrange their own services, have to manage their own logistics. It's more expensive, more complicated, more exposed. Doflamingo made crime easy. Without him, crime is hard again. And that's why Big Mum was hosting the tea party when she did. Chapter 8. 60. The tea party happens after Doflamingo's fall. The timing is not coincidental. Big Mum saw the vacuum and tried to fill it by positioning herself as the new central node. By hosting the 6 emperors and demonstrating she could provide the coordination they lost when Doflamingo went down. But it failed. The wedding turned into chaos. The assassination attempt derailed everything, and Big Mum never recovered that position, which left the vacuum unfilled, which is why the next several arcs are so chaotic, because the underworld lost its central coordinator and nobody successfully replaced him. The 6 emperors are still operating, they're still providing services. But there's no one person integrating all 6 services into seamless operations. So everything is slower, more expensive, more risky. The economy is still functioning, but it's functioning poorly, like a body with a damaged nervous system. All the organs work, but they're not communicating efficiently. So here's the synthesis of the 6 emperors. They're not criminals. They're infrastructure providers who happen to service criminals. They control the fundamental functions of any economy: information, intelligence, finance, logistics, storage, and cleanup. They work together as a system where using one service often requires using others, creating lock-in and dependency. They survived Doflamingo's fall because infrastructure outlasts individuals. And they represent the underworld's actual power structure, not the pirates who fight for territory, but the business people who make territory conquest possible. You can't run an empire without them. You can't wage war without them. You can't operate a criminal organization without them. They're the invisible architecture of the one-piece world. And they've been there the whole time, operating quietly, profiting from everyone's conflicts, maintaining the systems that make villainy economically viable. And now that Doflamingo's gone, now that the central coordinator is missing, the question becomes, who fills that vacuum? Who becomes the new nexus? The new super user who integrates all 6 services and makes the underworld efficient again? The answer, as we're going to see in the next saga, is that multiple people are trying. Crocodile with Cross Guild, Blackbeard with his expanding territory, even Luffy, accidentally, by liberating countries and disrupting supply chains. But none of them have succeeded yet. None of them have recreated what Doflamingo built. And until someone does, the underworld economy is going to stay fragmented, chaotic, and vulnerable. The 6 emperors are still standing, but the kingdom they built is shaking. And what comes next is going to determine whether the underworld survives or collapses entirely. So the underworld infrastructure survived Doflamingo's fall, but the operations built on that infrastructure started collapsing. And nowhere is this more visible than Wano, because when most people analyse the Wano arc, they focus on the Samurai Rebellion, on Luffy defeating Kaido, on Momonosuke reclaiming his birthright. They treat it as a liberation story, a heroic narrative about freeing an oppressed nation from a tyrant. And it is that. But it's also an economic story, a story about what happens when a non-aligned nation gets turned into an offshore manufacturing hub by a criminal empire, and what happens to the global supply chain when that hub gets shut down. Kaido didn't occupy Wano because he liked samurai aesthetics. He occupied it because Wano is a tax haven, because Wano isn't a member of the world government, which means it operates outside government jurisdiction, which means Kaido could build weapons factories there without oversight, without regulations, without anyone monitoring labour conditions or environmental impacts. Wano wasn't a conquest, it was outsourcing, and when Luffy liberated it, he didn't just free people, he shut down the factory, and the world is still dealing with the consequences. Chapter 9. 09, the beginning of the Wano arc. We learn something crucial that most people don't pay attention to. Wano is not a world government member nation. It's been isolated for centuries. It has its own culture, its own government structure, its own samurai warrior class. And critically, it doesn't pay tribute to the world government, which means the world government has no official jurisdiction there. Can't send marines to enforce laws, can't collect taxes, can't regulate commerce. Wano is, effectively, a sovereign nation that exists outside the international system, and that makes it incredibly valuable to anyone who wants to operate outside government oversight, because if you build something in Wano, the government can't legally shut it down. They'd have to invade, which would be an act of war against a sovereign nation, which creates diplomatic complications. So Wano is a loophole, a jurisdictional blind spot, and Kaido exploited it perfectly. Chapter 9. 42. We see the weapons factories in Udon, massive industrial operations, prisoners forced to work in brutal conditions, mining ore, refining materials, manufacturing weapons, and the scale is enormous. Chapter 9. 54. The factories are described as producing weapons at rates that can supply entire armies. This isn't artisan craftsmanship. This is industrial manufacturing, mass production. And the products aren't just swords and spears. They're advanced weapons using liquor iron ore and sea stone, materials that are rare and valuable and difficult to work with. Wano has the natural resources and the technical expertise to create premium military equipment. And Kaido monopolized both by conquering the country and installing Orochi as a puppet shogun. Now let's examine why this is economically brilliant from Kaido's perspective. First, the labor is free. Prisoners, political dissidents, anyone who opposed Orochi's rule gets thrown into the factories and forced to work. No wages, no benefits, no safety regulations, just work or die. That's zero labor cost. Second, the regulatory environment is non-existent. There's no government oversight monitoring environmental damage or working conditions or product safety. Kaido can dump pollutants into rivers, which we see in chapter 942 with the poisoned water in Okabor town. He can work people to death. He can manufacture weapons without quality inspections. Third, there's no taxation. Wano isn't paying tribute to the world government, and Orochi is Kaido's puppet, so any revenue generated stays within Kaido's control. No external authority is taking a cut. It's a completely unregulated, untaxed, forced labour manufacturing operation, producing premium goods for international markets. That's the dream scenario for any industrialist. Zero costs, maximum margins. And the customers? Chapter 9. 29. CP0 shows up in Wano to negotiate weapons purchases. The world government is buying from Kaido, directly, through Orochi as the intermediary. And they're doing it because Wano's products are better and cheaper than what they can get elsewhere. The sea stone bullets alone are worth the diplomatic complications of dealing with a Yonko. And because Wano isn't a member nation, because the transactions technically happen through Orochi's government and not through Kaido directly, the world government can maintain plausible deniability. They're buying from Wano, not buying from Kaido. It's a shell game. It's corporate structuring. Kaido is the CEO, Orochi is the subsidiary, and the world government is the customer who pretends not to know who really runs the company. But here's where Doflamingo's fall impacts this. Before Dressrosa, Kaido was selling weapons through Doflamingo's distribution network. Doflamingo handled the brokering, the shipping arrangements through Umit, the money transfers through Dufeld. It was clean, it was efficient. Kaido just had to manufacture and deliver to Doflamingo's intermediaries. After Doflamingo fell, Kaido lost that streamlined process. Chapter 9. 29. CP0 has to come to Wano directly, has to negotiate in person, has to be visible. That's more exposure, more risk. And it's not just CP's. Every other buyer Doflamingo used to connect to Kaido now has to arrange their own deals, has to find their own shipping, has to negotiate directly with Orochi or Kaido's subordinates. The transaction costs went up, the efficiency went down. Doflamingo's fall didn't stop Kaido from selling weapons, but it made the process more expensive and more exposed. And this is why Kaido accelerated his timeline in Wano. Chapter 9. 29. Kaido talks about the Fire Festival and his plans to announce the new Onigashima project. He's planning to turn Wano into his permanent base, to move the entire nation to a different location using Onigashima as a mobile fortress. Why the sudden urgency? Because Doflamingo's fall disrupted his economic model. The smile supply stopped. The distribution network fragmented. His competitive advantage in the Yonko power structure weakened. So Kaido pivoted to a different strategy. Instead of relying on underworld networks, he'd create his own closed system. Wano would be his factory, his fortress, and his nation-state all in one. He'd control the entire vertical integration, production, distribution, sales, everything. He'd become independent of the underworld infrastructure. But he needed time to build that, and Luffy didn't give him that time. Chapter 1. 1050. Luffy defeats Kaido. The occupation ends. Momonosuke becomes shogun, and one of his first acts, chapter 1052, is to open Wano's borders, to rejoin the international community, to end the isolation. And from a humanitarian perspective, that's wonderful. The people of Wano are free. The prisoners are released. The factories are shut down. The pollution stops. It's a liberation. But from an economic perspective, it's a supply shock. The world government just lost access to its primary sea stone weapon supplier. Every other faction that was buying from Kaido through Wano just lost their source. The global weapons market has a massive hole in it. And there's no immediate replacement because nobody else has Wano's combination of resources, expertise, and previous willingness to deal with criminals. So what happens? Chapter 1. 1056. Onward. We start seeing increased military activity from the world government, more marine mobilization, more aggressive tactics, and it's not because they suddenly became more evil, it's because they're trying to project strength while their actual military capacity is declining. They're rationing sea stone ammunition, they're struggling to replace equipment, they're dealing with a supply crisis that they can't publicly acknowledge because acknowledging it would mean admitting they were buying weapons from a Yonko. So they overcompensate with aggression, with shows of force, with crackdowns on piracy. They're trying to maintain the illusion of strength while scrambling to rebuild supply chains that Luffy accidentally destroyed. And here's the irony. Wano is better off, but the world is more unstable. The people of Wano are free, but that freedom came at the cost of removing a major stabilizing force in the global arms market. Kaido was a tyrant, but he was a reliable supplier. His factories produced predictable output. His deals closed consistently, and now that stability is gone, the weapons market is fragmented. Prices are probably spiking, smaller factions can't access the equipment they need, and conflicts that would have been managed through superior firepower are now being fought with inferior weapons, which means they're dragging on longer, causing more casualties. Luffy liberated Wano, and the second order effect is that he destabilized the global weapons economy. He didn't mean to. He was just saving his friends. But economics doesn't care about intentions. It only cares about supply and demand. And Luffy just eliminated a major supplier. That's Wano, not just a liberation story, an economic disruption story, a case study in what happens when you shut down an offshore manufacturing hub without a replacement ready. The people win, the system loses. And the world has to adapt to a new reality where the factory is closed and nobody knows how to replace it. So Wano falls. The weapons factory shuts down. The world government loses its primary sea stone supplier. And you'd think the government's response would be immediate, would be aggressive, would be to send admirals to reclaim the territory or find alternative suppliers or something, but that's not what happens. What happens is the reverie. Chapter 9, 03 through 9, 08, the reverie arc. Every 4 years, the leaders of all world government member nations gather at Mary Joyce for a conference. To discuss policy, to vote on initiatives, to coordinate international affairs. And the timing of this particular reverie, happening right after Doflamingo's fall and during Kaido's destabilization in Wano, is not coincidental. This wasn't a routine political summit. This was an emergency economic meeting. The world leaders weren't gathering to discuss philosophy or human rights or whatever the official agenda claimed. They were gathering because the underworld supply chains had collapsed and they needed to figure out how to maintain stability while rebuilding them. The reverie was damage control, and it failed spectacularly. Let's look at who attends the reverie and what their actual concerns would be. Chapter 9, 05 through 9, 08. We see representatives from dozens of nations. Kingdoms from all four blues and the Grand Line, and every single one of them has been affected by Doflamingo's fall. Not directly, maybe, but through second and third order effects. Nations that were buying weapons through Doflamingo's network can't anymore. Nations that were relying on underworld shipping through Umit are paying higher rates because demand increased after Doflamingo's coordination disappeared. Nations that borrowed from Dufeld to fund military operations are struggling to make payments because their revenue streams got disrupted. Every kingdom at the reverie has an economic crisis they're not publicly discussing, and they're all hoping the world government has solutions. But the government doesn't have solutions. The government has the same problems everyone else has, except worse, because they were Doflamingo's biggest customer. Chapter 9, 05. We see CP0 present at the reverie, not just as security, as active participants. They're monitoring conversations, managing information flow, ensuring certain topics don't get discussed publicly. And what topics are those? The ones that would expose the government's complicity in the underworld economy. Like the fact that they were buying weapons from Kaido. Like the fact that they were purchasing slaves through Doflamingo's auction house. Like the fact that their entire military-industrial complex is built on criminal infrastructure that just collapsed. The government can't admit any of this at the reverie because admitting it would undermine their legitimacy. So instead, they're trying to maintain appearances while privately scrambling. And then Cobra happens. Chapter 9. 8. King Cobra of Arabasta asks the Gorosei about the Void Century. He wants to know about the Nefertari family's history, about why they didn't become celestial dragons, about the secrets his ancestors left behind. And this seems like a historical question, a philosophical inquiry. But think about the timing. Cobra is asking these questions at the exact moment when the world government's economic vulnerabilities are most exposed, when their supply chains are collapsing, when their weapons suppliers are falling. And what Cobra discovers, what gets him killed, isn't just historical information. It's information that connects to current operations. Chapter 1. 1084. We learn that Cobra saw Imu, that he discovered the empty throne isn't empty, that there's a secret ruler the entire world doesn't know about, and if Imu is the secret ruler, then Imu is the one making economic decisions. Imu is the one who authorized dealing with Kaido. Imu is the one who allowed Doflamingo to operate. Imu is responsible for the system that just collapsed. So Cobra wasn't just killed for knowing historical secrets. He was killed for connecting historical secrets to current economic policy. For realizing that the world government's corruption isn't a recent development but an 800-year-old pattern. For understanding that the same authority that erased the Void Century is the same authority that's currently running weapons through criminal networks. Cobra became dangerous not because he knew about Joy Boy or the Ancient Kingdom. He became dangerous because he could expose the continuity between ancient crimes and modern crimes. He could prove the system is rotten at its foundation, not just at its surface. And the government couldn't allow that information to spread to the other 50 kingdoms at the reverie. So they killed him, made it look like an accident or blamed it on the Revolutionary Army, and moved on. But here's where it gets interesting. Sabo was there. Chapter 9. 05 through 908. Sabo and the Revolutionary Army commanders infiltrate Mary Joyce during the reverie, and their timing is perfect. Not coincidentally perfect. Strategically perfect. Because the Revolutionary Army has been tracking the Underworld's collapse just like everyone else. Dragon, their leader, is smart enough to know that when your enemy is in crisis, that's when you strike. When the world government is dealing with supply chain disruptions and economic instability and trying to maintain appearances at a major international summit, their defences are stretched thin, their attention is divided, they're vulnerable. So Sabo doesn't just infiltrate, he goes deep, deeper than anyone has gone in centuries. And he discovers something so shocking that when he reports it to Dragon in chapter 956, Dragon's reaction tells us it's world-shaking information. We still don't know exactly what Sabo saw, but we know it's connected to Imu, to the empty throne, to the fundamental lies the world government is built on. And we know the Revolutionary Army has been acting more aggressively since the reverie. Chapter 1. 1083 through 1085. We see the Revolutionary Army openly declaring war on the Celestial Dragons, attacking their supplies, liberating territories. That's not guerrilla tactics anymore. That's conventional warfare. And the Revolutionary Army can afford to escalate like this because the world government is weakened. Because Doflamingo's fall exposed their economic dependencies. Because Wano's liberation cut off their weapons supply. Because the reverie revealed their internal vulnerabilities to anyone paying attention. So the reverie wasn't a political summit. It was an attempted economic recovery meeting that turned into a security disaster. The world leaders came hoping for solutions and left with more problems. Cobra got killed for asking the wrong questions. Sabo infiltrated and discovered information that changed the Revolutionary Army's entire strategy. And the government's attempt to project stability through pageantry backfired because the pageantry couldn't hide the underlying chaos. Chapter 9. 56. After the reverie, Morgans publishes a story about what happened. And the story is explosive. Not the official government version. The real version. Deaths. Assassination attempts. Revolutionary infiltration. The complete failure of the summit to accomplish anything useful. And that story spreads across the world. Everyone now knows the government is in crisis. Everyone knows the reverie was a disaster. And that knowledge accelerates the collapse. Because here's what happens when people lose faith in institutions. They stop cooperating. Nations that were paying tribute start questioning whether they should. Pirates who were afraid of marine reprisals start getting bolder. Revolutionary cells that were operating cautiously start taking risks. The perception of weakness becomes actual weakness because people act on their perceptions. And Morgans, by publishing the truth about the reverie's chaos, created a feedback loop. Government looks weak. People act accordingly. Government becomes weaker. Morgans reports on the increasing weakness. Cycle continues. The reverie was supposed to stabilize the situation. Instead, it advertised vulnerability to everyone watching. And now, fast forward to where we are in the manga currently, post-Egghead. The world is more chaotic than it's been in decades. Multiple Yonko defeated, warlord system abolished, revolutionary army openly warring with the government, cross-guild hunting marines. And all of it traces back to the reverie's failure to manage the post-Doflamingo crisis. The world leaders had one chance to coordinate a response, to rebuild supply chains collectively, to present a unified front against the chaos. They failed. They killed Cobra instead of answering his questions. They let the Revolutionary Army infiltrate their most secure location. They let Morgans publish a story that made them look incompetent, and now they're dealing with the consequences. The reverie was supposed to be damage control. Instead, it was the moment everyone realised the damage was irreparable. That's what the reverie actually was. Not a political summit. An economic crisis meeting disguised as tradition. And it failed because the government was trying to solve economic problems with political theatre, trying to maintain the appearance of control while the foundation was crumbling. You can't rebuild supply chains with speeches. You can't restore stability with pageantry. You need actual economic coordination, actual infrastructure rebuilding, actual honesty about what's broken and how to fix it. And the government couldn't be honest. Couldn't admit what was broken, couldn't coordinate effectively because doing so would require acknowledging their own crimes. So they pretended everything was fine, and the pretending made everything worse. So the reverie failed. The world leaders couldn't coordinate a response to the economic collapse. The government is scrambling, and into that chaos steps someone who's been waiting for exactly this opportunity, Crocodile. Chapter 1. 1056 post-Wano, we get the reveal that shook the fandom, Cross Guild, a new organisation led by Crocodile and Mihawk, with Buggy as the supposed figurehead, that's issuing bounties on marines, reverse bounties. Instead of the government paying people to catch pirates, Cross Guild is paying people to catch marines. And everyone treated this as a joke at first. Treated it as Buggy failing upward again, as Crocodile and Mihawk babysitting a clown. But that's missing what's actually happening. Cross Guild isn't a pirate crew, it's a hostile takeover. It's Crocodile doing exactly what Doflamingo did, positioning himself as the middleman between criminals and power structures, except instead of facilitating cooperation, he's facilitating opposition. He's weaponizing the underworld against the world government, and it's working. Let me remind you who Crocodile actually is, because people forget. Chapter 2. 109. Arabasta Arc. Crocodile wasn't just a warlord, he was running Baroque Works, a criminal organisation with hundreds of agents, structured in cells, with clear hierarchies and specific objectives. He was trying to steal Pluton to gain leverage over the world, and when that failed, when Luffy defeated him. Chapter 2. 41. Crocodile was sent to Impel Down, But Chapter 544, Marineford Crocodile escapes during the chaos, and then he disappears. For hundreds of chapters, we don't see him, don't hear about him, he's just gone. And everyone assumed he retired, or he's planning something in the background, or he's just not relevant anymore. Wrong. He was analysing, he was watching Doflamingo operate, watching the underworld economy, learning how the system worked, and waiting for the right moment to enter the market. And the right moment was post-Doflamingo, post-Kaido, post-Reverie, when the underworld infrastructure still existed but the coordination was gone. When the 6 emperors were still providing services but nobody was integrating those services into coherent operations. When there was a vacuum that everyone could see but nobody had figured out how to fill. Crocodile saw that vacuum and made a calculation. He can't be Doflamingo. Can't recreate that exact model because Doflamingo's power came from his celestial dragon connections and his warlord status, both of which Crocodile lacks. But Crocodile can innovate, can create a new business model that serves the same function, connecting criminals to opportunity, while exploiting the government's current weakness. And that business model is Cross-Guild. Chapter 1. 1056 through 1058. Here's how it works. Cross-Guild issues bounties on marine officers, not on all marines, on specific officers. Chapter 1. 1082. We see the bounty structure. A regular marine soldier might be worth a small amount. A captain is worth more. A rear admiral even more. Vice admirals are worth tens of millions. And admirals are worth billions. It's a tiered system that mirrors the government's own bounty structure, except inverted. And what this creates is a market. Pirates who used to hunt other pirates for bounties can now hunt marines instead. Bounty hunters who worked for the government can switch sides if the pay is better. Even civilians who've been abused by corrupt marines have incentive to turn them in to Cross-Guild. Crocodile has created a reverse incentive structure that turns the government's own enforcement mechanism against them. But here's the genius part. Cross-Guild doesn't have to pay most of these bounties, because most marines won't be caught. Most bounty hunters won't succeed. The threat alone is enough to create the desired effect. Chapter 1. 1058. After Cross-Guild announces the bounty system, marines start getting nervous. They're looking over their shoulders. They're questioning whether patrols are safe. They're worrying about being targeted. That's psychological warfare. That's terrorizing your enemy's workforce without firing a shot. And the few bounties that do get paid, those become advertising, become proof that Cross-Guild is serious, that they follow through, that they're a legitimate operation worth working for. Crocodile is spending money strategically to create fear disproportionate to the actual expenditure. And where's the money coming from? Because issuing bounties requires capital, requires liquidity, requires a treasury large enough to pay out potentially billions of berries. And Crocodile just got out of prison. He shouldn't have that kind of money. Except. Chapter 1. 1082 reveals that Cross-Guild has been operating for a while, has been building resources, and Crocodile is a businessman. He knows how to monetize operations. My theory, based on context, Crocodile is working with the Underworld Emperors, specifically Doflamingo and Umit. He borrowed capital from Doflamingo to fund Cross-Guild's initial operations. He's using Umit's shipping network to move resources and communicate with bounty hunters across the world. He's probably coordinating with Gibbison for weapons storage. And in exchange, Cross-Guild is generating business for them. More pirates hunting marines means more violence, means more need for weapons, shipping, storage, disposal. Cross-Guild isn't competing with the underworld infrastructure, it's generating demand for it. And Buggy? Chapter 1. 1082. Buggy's speech about wanting to claim the One Piece, about competing with the other emperors, about building a real empire. Everyone laughed at that, treated it as comedy, but Crocodile's expression during that speech tells you everything. He's annoyed, yes, but he's not shutting Buggy down. Why? Because Buggy is useful. Buggy has a following. Chapter 1. 1058. Buggy's delivery service had thousands of mercenaries and pirates working for him. When Cross-Guild formed, All those people transferred allegiance. They're now working for Cross-Guild, hunting Marines, creating chaos. Crocodile didn't choose Buggy as a partner because he respects him. He chose Buggy because Buggy brings a ready-made workforce that's loyal to Buggy's brand. Crocodile is using Buggy's reputation as a recruitment tool. It's brilliant, it's cynical, it's exactly what a businessman would do. And Mihawk. Chapter 1. 1058. Mihawk joined Cross-Guild to get Marines off his back. The government abolished the warlord system in Chapter 956, which means Mihawk lost his legal immunity. Marines started hunting him, and Mihawk, who values his peace and solitude, needed protection. Not because he can't fight Marines, he absolutely can, but because constant harassment is annoying. So Crocodile offered him a deal. Join Cross-Guild, lend your name and reputation, and we'll create a system where Marines are too busy defending themselves to hunt you. Mihawk isn't Crocodile's partner. He's a contractor. He's providing brand value in exchange for security, and Crocodile is getting one of the world's strongest swordsmen as a deterrent against anyone who might try to eliminate Cross-Guild's leadership. So Cross-Guild is a leveraged buyout. Crocodile borrowed capital from Doflamingo, hired Umit's shipping network, acquired Buggy's workforce through a figurehead arrangement, contracted Mihawk as security and brand reinforcement, and created a new business model, reverse bounties, that generates demand for underworld services while destabilizing the government's enforcement capacity. It's not a pirate crew. It's a startup, a venture-backed military contractor that's disrupting the security industry by changing the incentive structure. And it's working because the government is too weak to shut it down. They're stretched too thin. They're dealing with too many crises simultaneously. They can't spare the resources to eliminate Cross-Guild when they're also fighting the Revolutionary Army, dealing with the aftermath of losing 2 Yonko, managing the warlord abolition fallout, and trying to maintain control over member nations that are losing faith in their ability to provide protection. And here's the endgame I think Crocodile is planning. Cross-Guild isn't trying to destroy the world government, it's trying to replace Doflamingo's function. Trying to become the new nexus that coordinates underworld operations and makes crime efficient again. Except instead of serving both criminals and the government like Doflamingo did, Cross-Guild is exclusively serving criminals and actively opposing the government, which means every criminal organisation that wants government interference has incentive to work with Cross-Guild. Every pirate who's tired of being hunted has incentive to join. Every revolutionary cell that needs weapons or funding has incentive to coordinate with them. Crocodile is building the anti-government coalition by making it economically rational to oppose the government, by making it profitable, by turning rebellion from an ideological choice into a business decision. That's Cross-Guild. That's Crocodile's play. Not revenge, not random chaos. Strategic repositioning in a post-Doflamingo market. Filling the vacuum with a new model that serves the same function but exploits current conditions more effectively. And if it succeeds, if Cross-Guild becomes the new coordination point for the underworld, then Crocodile becomes what Doflamingo was, too big to fail, too systemically important to eliminate. The middleman everyone needs. Except this time, the middleman is explicitly hostile to the government, and that's when the final war becomes inevitable. So Crocodile is rebuilding the underworld's coordination infrastructure by creating Cross-Guild and weaponizing criminals against the government. That's one response to Doflamingo's fall. But there's another player making moves in the chaos, and his strategy is completely different. Blackbeard, Marshall D. Teach. And everyone thinks they understand what Blackbeard is doing. They think he's collecting devil fruits because he wants to be the strongest. Because he's power hungry, because he's building an army of ability users to fight Luffy for the One Piece. And sure, that's part of it. But if you actually track Blackbeard's actions, if you map what he's acquiring and when and why, you realise he's not building a pirate crew. He's building a conglomerate. He's not collecting power. He's collecting assets. Strategic resources that give him capabilities nobody else has. And every move he makes is about vertical integration. About controlling supply chains from production to distribution, about becoming self-sufficient so he doesn't need the underworld infrastructure that just collapsed. Blackbeard isn't trying to fill Doflamingo's vacuum, He's trying to make the vacuum irrelevant by owning everything himself. Let's start by tracking what Blackbeard has actually acquired since we first met him. Chapter 2. 34. Jaya. Blackbeard is introduced. At that point, he has the Yami Yami no Mi, the darkness fruit, which he murdered Thatch to steal from Whitebeard's crew. Already we see his pattern: identify a valuable asset, acquire it through whatever means necessary, integrate it into his operations. Chapter 4. 40. Impelled down. Blackbeard invades the world's most secure prison specifically to recruit level 6 prisoners, the strongest, most dangerous criminals in the world. Shiryu, Katarina Devon, Vasco Shot, Avalo Pizarro, San Juan Wolf. He's not recruiting them because they're loyal. He's recruiting them because they have specific capabilities. Shiryu is a master swordsman with the invisible fruit. Devon has the transformation abilities of the mythical Zoan dog fruit model, nine-tailed fox. Each crew member is a strategic acquisition that fills a gap in his portfolio. Chapter 576. Marineford. Blackbeard kills Whitebeard and steals his Gura Gura no Mai, the Quake fruit. And this is where everyone noticed his unique ability to hold multiple devil fruits, which shouldn't be possible. But nobody asked why he specifically wanted the Quake fruit. What capability does it provide? Destruction, yes, but more importantly, terraforming. The Quake fruit can create earthquakes and tsunamis, can reshape landscapes, can destroy infrastructure on a massive scale. That's not just a weapon. That's a demolition tool. That's the ability to remove obstacles, to clear territory, to force evacuations. Blackbeard didn't just acquire combat power. He acquired the ability to change geography. And then he disappears for 2 years during the time skip. And when he reappears, Chapter 795, he's a Yonko. He's taken territory. He's fought Cypher Pole and won, acquiring classified documents. He's established himself as one of the foremost powerful pirates in the world. And how did he do it? Chapter 9. 25. We learn he attacked the Revolutionary Army's base at Boltago, not to fight Dragon directly, to acquire whatever resources and information were stored there. Chapter 9. 56. We learn the government abolished the warlord system and sent Marines to capture the former warlords. And Chapter 957, Blackbeard attacks Amazon Lily during this chaos specifically to capture Hancock. Not to kill her, to acquire her. Because Hancock has 2 things Blackbeard wants: her devil fruit, the love fruit which can petrify people, and her genetics. She's a potential source for cloning research, which we know the government has been doing. Chapter 1. 1059 through 1000 items. 80. Blackbeard attacks Amazon Lily, fights Rayleigh to a standstill, and ultimately retreats. But then Chapter 1. 1080. Blackbeard's crew kidnaps Kobe during the chaos. Why Kobe? Because Kobe is a marine hero with observation Haki training and connections to both Garp and Luffy. He's valuable as a hostage, yes, but more importantly, he's valuable as intelligence. As a source of information about marine operations, about Garp's techniques, about government strategies. Blackbeard is collecting people who provide specific strategic value. Kobe isn't just a prisoner, he's an asset. And then, Chapter 1. 1081, Hachinosu gets invaded by Garp attempting to rescue Kobe. Garp fights Blackbeard's entire crew, showcases incredible power, and ultimately gets overwhelmed. But the important detail isn't the fight, it's that Blackbeard was willing to defend Hachinosu against a marine legend. Chapter 1. 1087. Garp is defeated and Blackbeard's crew captures him. Not kills him, captures him, because even a defeated Garp is valuable. As a hostage to prevent marine retaliation, as a source of information about advanced Haki techniques, as leverage against both the Marines and Luffy. Blackbeard isn't eliminating enemies, he's converting them into assets. Now let's talk about Hachinosu itself, because this reveals Blackbeard's entire strategy. Chapter 1. 1080. Hachinosu is described as a pirate island, a lawless territory where criminals operate openly, and Blackbeard controls it. But he's not just using it as a hideout. Chapter 1. 1087. We see infrastructure, buildings, operations. Blackbeard has turned Hachinosu into a base of operations, a headquarters. And what does a headquarters provide? Logistics, storage, communication networks, training facilities, everything you need to run a large-scale organization. Blackbeard is building the physical infrastructure that Doflamingo relied on the Underworld Emperors to provide. He's creating his own Giberson, storage, his own Umit, shipping through his fleet, his own Dufeld, funding through plundered treasure. He's vertically integrating. And most recently, Chapter 1. 1093, we learn that Blackbeard's crew kidnapped Pudding from Whole Cake Island. Why Pudding? Because Pudding is a Three-Eye Tribe member who can potentially read poneglyphs when her third eye awakens. That's the key to reaching Laughtail. That's the key to finding the One Piece. Blackbeard isn't relying on Robin like Luffy is. He's acquiring his own poneglyph reader, his own independent capability. And if Pudding's ability awakens, Blackbeard becomes independent of the entire poneglyph scholar ecosystem. He doesn't need to cooperate with anyone. He can navigate directly to Laughtail on his own terms. See the pattern? Every acquisition Blackbeard makes serves a specific strategic function. Yummy Yummy no Mi nullifies other devil fruit users, provides unique advantage in combat. Gura Gura no Mi, terraforming and mass destruction capability, level 6 prisoners, specialized capabilities, invisibility, transformation, size, etc. Classified government documents, intelligence about enemy operations, Hancock, attempted, petrification ability and potential cloning source. Kobe, intelligence about marine operations and Haki techniques. Garp, captured, advanced Haki knowledge and leverage against Marines/Luffy. Pudding, independent poneglyph reading capability. Hachinosu, physical infrastructure for operations. This isn't random power accumulation. This is portfolio diversification. This is a CEO building a vertically integrated company that controls every stage of production. Blackbeard doesn't want to be the strongest, he wants to be the most self-sufficient. He wants to control enough capabilities that he never needs to rely on external suppliers, never needs to negotiate with the Underworld Emperors, never needs to trade with anyone. He's building independence through asset acquisition. And this makes him fundamentally different from every other major player. Luffy builds coalitions through friendship and liberates territories through idealism. Crocodile rebuilds underworld coordination through economic incentives. The world government maintains control through institutional power and violence. But Blackbeard builds capabilities through acquisition and operates as a completely independent entity. He's the only major faction that doesn't need the underworld infrastructure to function. He is his own infrastructure. And here's why this matters for the endgame. When the final war happens, when all the major factions converge, everyone except Blackbeard will be dependent on supply chains, on logistics, on external support systems. The Revolutionary Army needs Dufeld's funding and Umit's shipping. Cross Guild needs the Underworld Emperors to service their operations. The world government needs to rebuild their weapons supply after losing Wano. But Blackbeard has everything he needs internally. He has combat power through devil fruits. He has intelligence through captured prisoners. He has territory through Hachinosu. He has logistics through his fleet. He has a poneglyph reader through Pudding. He's the only faction that can operate completely independently of the global economy, which makes him the most dangerous. Not because he's the strongest, because he's the most resilient. You can disrupt Crocodile by targeting his underworld connections. You can weaken the government by attacking their supply chains. But you can't disrupt Blackbeard by cutting his supply lines because he doesn't have supply lines. He's self-sufficient. He's built a conglomerate that owns every capability vertically. And that means he can survive longer, operate more flexibly, and adapt to chaos better than anyone else. While everyone else is scrambling to rebuild networks that Doflamingo's fool destroyed, Blackbeard is just moving forward because he never depended on those networks in the first place. That's Blackbeard's strategy. That's why he's not the final villain in a traditional sense. He's the final capitalist, the endpoint of accumulation, the person who owns so much that he doesn't need anyone else. And in a story about breaking down barriers and creating unity, Blackbeard represents the opposite. Total independence achieved through total ownership. He's not trying to connect people or coordinate systems or rebuild infrastructure. He's trying to make those things irrelevant by controlling everything himself. And that's why Luffy will have to defeat him, because Luffy's dream requires cooperation, requires everyone at the party. And Blackbeard's strategy is predicated on never needing anyone. They're incompatible at the philosophical and economic levels, and only one model can win. So we've spent the last 2+ hours tracing money through the One Piece world, and I need you to remember where we started. I told you at the beginning of this video that when Luffy defeated Doflamingo in Dressrosa, he didn't just beat a warlord, he crashed the global economy, he removed the central bank of crime, and for the last 2 hours, I've been proving that statement, showing you how Doflamingo's smile operation functioned as currency, how the world government was his biggest customer, how the birdcage was an attempt to destroy financial evidence, how every major conflict since Dressrosa, Whole Cake Island, Wano, the Reverie, Cross Guild, Blackbeard's expansion, all of it traces back to the economic instability created when the middleman disappeared. And now we're here, at the edge of the final war, and I need you to understand what that final war is actually going to be about. Everyone thinks the final war is going to be the revolutionary army versus the world government, ideology versus tyranny, freedom versus oppression. And sure, that's the surface level, that's the narrative everyone can see. But underneath that, the actual conflict is economic. It's about who controls the underworld infrastructure after Doflamingo's fall. It's about whether Crocodile successfully fills the vacuum with Cross Guild, whether Blackbeard's self-sufficient conglomerate makes the underworld irrelevant, whether the world government can rebuild their supply chains and maintain control, whether the revolutionary army can leverage the chaos into actual systemic change. It's not a war about values, it's a war about who gets to run the economy when the current system collapses. It's a hostile takeover, it's corporate restructuring with devil fruits and Haki. And the 6 Underworld Emperors, they're going to be the real prize, because Morgans controls information and can shape what the world believes. Stussy controls intelligence and might still be feeding information to the government despite her betrayal. Dufeld controls finance and everyone owes him money. Umit controls shipping and nothing moves without him. Gibberson controls storage and knows what everyone's planning. Drug Petzlo controls disposal and knows who's killing whom. Whoever controls these 6 people controls the infrastructure of crime, controls the supply chains, controls the information flows, controls the economy, and every major faction is going to be fighting to secure alliances with them or neutralize them or replace them, except Luffy. Because Luffy doesn't understand any of this. Luffy doesn't know he crashed the economy by defeating Doflamingo, doesn't know that liberating Wano shut down the global weapons supply, doesn't know that the Reverie's failure was an economic crisis disguised as politics, doesn't know that Cross Guild and Blackbeard are fighting over economic infrastructure. Luffy just punches people who hurt his friends and accidentally destroys the systems that make tyranny economically sustainable. And he's going to keep doing it. He's going to keep liberating countries and defeating tyrants and breaking supply chains without ever understanding the macroeconomic consequences. And by the time he finds the One Piece, by the time he triggers whatever planetary transformation that treasure causes, he's going to have dismantled the entire underworld economy without meaning to. Because here's the thing about Luffy that makes him so dangerous to every economic system in the world. He doesn't participate in markets. He doesn't buy or sell. He doesn't trade or negotiate. He just takes what he needs and gives away what he doesn't. He operates completely outside exchange relationships. And when someone who doesn't believe in exchange destroys someone who does, when someone who doesn't understand money defeats someone whose entire power is built on money, the economic system can't process it, can't adapt, can't recover. Doflamingo's entire empire was built on being the middleman, on facilitating transactions, on making money flow efficiently. And Luffy punched him unconscious and walked away without taking any of his money or his territory or his business connections. Just left him for the Marines and moved on. That's not how economic actors behave. That's not how rational agents operate. And that's why Luffy keeps winning, because he's incomprehensible to everyone playing the economic game. And the final war is going to be the same thing at scale. The world government is going to be it's going to be trying to maintain economic control. Cross-Guild is going to be trying to seize economic infrastructure. Blackbeard is going to be trying to make economic control irrelevant through vertical integration. The Revolutionary Army is going to be trying to dismantle the economic hierarchy, and Luffy is going to be trying to save his friends and free people who are trapped. And Luffy's going to win, not because his strategy is better, but because he's not playing the same game. He's not fighting for control of the economy. He's fighting to destroy the conditions that make the economy necessary. And you can't defend against that. You can't strategize against someone who doesn't want what you're offering. So here's my prediction for how this ends. The final war begins. Every major faction converges. The Revolutionary Army attacks Mary Jouai's. Cross-Guild destabilizes marine forces worldwide. Blackbeard makes his move for the One Piece. The world government deploys everything they have. And somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, Luffy finds Laugh Tale, finds the One Piece, activates whatever mechanism it contains. And that mechanism doesn't just change political structures, it changes the geography, destroys the red line, merges the seas, eliminates the barriers that make the current economy possible, and suddenly none of the economic infrastructure matters anymore. Because you can't run a shipping monopoly when there are no barriers to navigate. You can't control trade routes when the seas are unified. You can't maintain a slave market when your auction house sinks into the ocean along with Mary Jouai's. The underworld economy doesn't get seized or reformed, it just stops being necessary. And everyone who was fighting over control of it realizes too late that they were fighting over something that was about to become obsolete. That's why this story is called One Piece. Not because the treasure is one thing, but because the solution to every problem in this world is unity, is removing the divisions, is making it so people don't need middlemen and brokers and underworld emperors and criminal infrastructure because everyone can just cooperate directly. And Luffy's dream, his desire to throw a party with everyone in the world, requires that unity, requires removing the barriers, requires destroying the economic systems that profit from separation. And Luffy's going to do it by accident. By pursuing his stupid, simple, childish dream without understanding that achieving it requires dismantling the entire global economy that's been maintained for 800 years. So when I said at the beginning of this video that Luffy crashed the economy by defeating Doflamingo, I meant it as preview. Because Doflamingo was practice, was a small-scale demonstration of what happens when Luffy removes someone systemically important without understanding the system. The final war is going to be Luffy doing that to everyone, to the world government, to the Underworld Emperors, to every economic structure that makes the current world function. And after he's done, after the red line is gone and the seas are merged and the underworld infrastructure is obsolete, there's going to be chaos. Massive chaos. Supply chains destroyed. Economic networks collapsed. Old power structures irrelevant. And in that chaos, people are going to have to figure out how to cooperate without middlemen, how to trade without criminal infrastructure, how to live in a world where the party Luffy wanted is actually possible because the barriers that prevented it are gone. That's the dark economy of One Piece. That's the money, the commodities, the infrastructure, the power structures that actually make the world function. And that's what Luffy is going to destroy without ever understanding he destroyed it. Because he doesn't fight economics, he doesn't fight systems, he just fights people who hurt his friends. And when you remove enough people, when you liberate enough territories, when you punch enough systemic institutions in the face, eventually the system itself collapses and a new world begins. Not because you planned it, but because you refuse to accept the old one. But you let me know what you think in the comments. And please do subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.